Finally, my fourth attempt. Hi guys. Sorry I'm late. I had to reboot. I had to do a lot of things, but finally. Yeehaw.
Cross to other Christians because they're the ones going out.
Oh, come on.
The Holy Spirit. We rebuke anxious thoughts. We take up your shield of faith for protection to block and destroy all the darts and threats thrown at us by the enemy. We put on the helmet of salvation to cover our minds and thoughts, reminding us that we are children of a mighty King. We are forgiven, set
Hi Diane. Hi, you bud. Good to see ya.
free, saved by the blood of Jesus. We take up the sword of the Spirit, your living word, that has the power to demolish strongholds and is sharper than any double-edged sword. We come to you, Lord, in prayer daily. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and this week I'm honored to have back on the podcast again for the third time, the one and only Gary Wayne. If it's your first time here watching Gary, I'll link his playlist in the show notes below so you can go check out his previous episodes. A self-proclaimed Christian contrarian, Gary authored the groundbreaking book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy: How Secret Societies and the Descendants of Giants Plan to Enslave Mankind, and has since become a global authority on all things biblical prophecy, language etymology, secret societies, hidden history, and so much more. I would highly suggest purchasing his book. You can grab it on Amazon or get your signed copy on his website, www.genesis6conspiracy.com, which is what I did. It's a one-of-a-kind experience reading the Genesis 6 conspiracy that details the role of modern-day Nephilim and Satan's plan to install the Antichrist at the end of days. There's literally no other book like it out there that you'll find, and I always believe that the best way to...
Yeah, Han, is that because of that train crash? Did that happen to you, did it?
...our money where our mouth is to support and resource the creators who do podcasts like this for free so they can continue educating the masses on these important topics. Last time Gary was on, he did an incredible overview on the New World Order, the end times, and the hierarchies of secret societies. This time, Gary is going to take us down a vast rabbit hole in the first of our Secret Society Deep Dive series, where he'll break down some of the secret societies he outlined in the last episode, starting this week with the Jesuits, the Committee of 300, and the Rosicrucians. In order to understand how our world works, it's imperative that we not only understand the obvious events that we can see with our own eyes, but to understand that we live in a spiritual and supernatural world ruled by hidden powers and secret societies. I always foreshadow episodes with Gary, saying that you'll need a pen and paper to take notes, and this time is no different. You're about to learn a ton in a short amount of time. So you guys, without further ado, help me in welcoming my guest of honor, Christian contrarian, author, biblical wordsmith, podcaster, selfless educator, and a hero to myself and many, the one, the only, Gary Wayne. Gary, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Well, thank you for inviting me back, and so anxious to, again, sort of communicate some information to the audience, and I think they're going to find what we're going to talk about today will connect a few dots. So I'm pretty happy to do a little deeper dive because we're going to go into an area that most people just sort of get confused in this maze of organizations. And so this show is going to line up very well with the last show that we did.
Last show was awesome. This stuff I think can be really intimidating for people because there's just so many secret societies, and it's hard to envision how they could possibly all be in cahoots, for better lack of terms, together, and understanding that they all have their own kind of agendas within it, and then how they connect with other ones. And I think you do the best job out of anybody I've ever heard, and I'm sure all of your fans and people who listen to you agree. You do the best job out of anybody of connecting all these dots. The research you've put into this is just phenomenal. And like I said, in his book too, it outlines a lot of, I wouldn't say everything that he talks about on podcasts, but everything and more. There's so much in here. It's an incredible book. Any updates on your second book coming out?
Yeah, I finished the proofread of the 84 chapters, and it's for people who are wondering what maybe it's about and what the name of the book is. It's going to be called the Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2, how understanding prehistory and Rephaim giants help understand end time prophecy. So this is a book specifically targeted at the Christian audience to have sort of ready set arguments in place for a lot of the pushback that you'll get, whether it's from Christians or non-Christians or seculars. You'll have some arguments there that are almost pretty much sort of designed to be ready made. And it's my belief that to understand prophecy, you have to understand prehistory, because so much of the context comes out of that, and everything drives off of the angelic rebellion and the creation of Adam and what happens to the Adamites. So we need to sort of understand that if we're going to understand how to take on the ever-changing world that we're in. And if I'm correct, I think we're probably in the fig tree generation, so it's even more important to understand what's going on, because like the secret societies we're going to talk about, the sequential events of end time prophecy can run people into mazes, and it's important we get it right so that we don't lose our credibility.
Absolutely. That's really exciting. What a neat name for your book too. I love how it's obvious that it's by the same author, but it's still going to be so different. And I think it's really important too to get these messages across to other Christians, because they're the ones going out there and telling their friends about what they're reading and getting other people interested in these topics. And, breaking it down in a palatable way is so important. Like I said, this can be really intimidating. And even people that start going down these rabbit holes can sometimes lose their way in a sense, because it's so vast. When you think you've reached the end of the rabbit hole, you realize you're just starting, and it leads so many different other paths. I think you had said in a couple of podcasts that I listened to, you experienced that a lot, connecting these secret societies. You'd think you kind of had your path going, you were going up the root of the tree and up to the branches, and then all of a sudden you'd be thrown off and have to go back down the trunk and figure out where you kind of, veered off and how to put it together again. So I really appreciate all this work that you've done, because it's not easy for anybody to do, and you do it in a way that's really palatable and easy to understand.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I think it's really important for Christians to understand our enemies and how they think and what they intend to do. And I know that for some people, no matter what, their faith is so strong that they're not going to be concerned and they're never going to be budged. But that's not everybody. And if we underestimate the skill and the determination and the tactics and the strategy that the adversaries have, they're going to be able to fulfill, and biblically we understand they will fulfill, a great delusion, a great deception, and they'll deceive even the elect, as the book of Matthew talks about in the signs that Jesus provides. So the better we can understand and then communicate that to other people, is more people will not be deceived unless they truly wish to be part of that side, because everybody's going to be faced with choices unlike anything that we've seen ever before. So that's one of the motivations why I wanted to explore this, and that I understood that secret societies come out of the religion. They come out of the organizational structure of the giants in prehistory, and they're here today, and they take their history right back into prehistory. So we have a very, broad perspective as a collective as to how the organization is structured. And in the last show, I think I talked about the thelemic tree, and I talk more about this tree. I don't talk about it in the first book, but I talk about it in the sequel that's coming out. And the new book is designed not to be redundant and not to cover all, territory covered before, but only where it's important to link, so that people will sort of say, okay, well, I think he missed something there. I don't know how he got from point A to point B. So that's the only time it's going to be redundant. You can read the books independently. They're designed to do so, but I think you'll find that they'll dovetail very, very well, and you may want to read both. That's the whole. So we have like pyramids and all sorts of different ways that people try and do that organizational structure. And as we talked about in the last show, you just run out of pyramid sort of space because there's just too many organizations, and then you don't know how they sort of intersect. And so we talked about the thelemic tree and the tree trunk organizations, and then they would take those tree trunk organizations, take up a certain amount of tree trunk space, and then they have branches that go down more or less in a evergreen or a cedar, let's say a cedar of Lebanon, just because I like to be controversial, that is located in Mount Hermon, and the Amorites were compared to the cedars of Lebanon, and it's a very important tree in occultism. And in this case, it's very appropriate for the secret societies because those branches tend to go down and they're evergreen. It's an immortal, powerful tree that grows straight up. And around the tree trunk area where those branches go down, they intersect into a trunk organization. And then you have a hierarchy within the branches. So the lower level you get down on the branch, or further out on a split on the branch, is the lower that organization will be in terms of its hierarchy. So at the bottom of the tree trunk, we have Freemasonry. Immediately above it, as we talked about in the last show, but in case people missed it, we talked about the Illuminati operating the degrees just above Freemasonry. And then you have the Rosicrucians, which becomes the intersection between the Royal Masonic pure bloodlines and the ones that are rising through Freemasonry, Illuminati, and some will even make it into the bottom order of Rosicrucians. The top above the Rosicrucians are the Committee of 300, who we're going to talk about today, the Council of 33, who we have to talk about when we talk about the other groups that we're going to talk about. And then above the Council of 33 is the Family of 13, and that's the Western secret society organizations, understanding that there's going to be other trees around the world. So China is notorious for secret societies within their religions and their ancient culture, and they're considered as equals in separate organizations to the ones that come out of Europe. So that in itself should be eye-opening, that
I never knew that.
there's competition and rivals out there, which is
G'day,
why
boss.
will
Good to
make
see
the
you,
end
mate.
time interesting and confusing at times. So this tree, as I said, is an evergreen tree for the secret societies, and it has roots that go down into the earth and will touch heaven at the top. And so as a sort of allegory, those at the top would be God-like. But the true heaven, as the spurious forces, as the adversarial forces believe, is in the other world, in the nether world, in Hades, in Sheol. And so that's in the earth in another dimension, but in the same space, but in another dimension. And that the power derives from the roots that goes up the tree and down the branches and then caps it at the top. And there's another tree that people probably haven't really connected into how far we are immersed into polytheist imagery and understanding is there's the tree of genealogies. And this is more like an elm tree. And we might even talk about the elm tree a little bit today, that it's important in polytheism. And this is a hardwood tree, and it sheds its leaves. So whereas the cedar tree would reflect in its allegory immortals and immortality and the search for immortality, the elm tree of genealogies would represent reincarnation because it's reborn every year. So it's still part of the belief system, but it's more suited for the genealogical branches and things, and why you see that as used as its tree for genealogies and where that tree comes from. They're both the world tree. They just have sort of different sort of meanings. And it's the pedigree of the royals, the spurious offspring of the fallen angels, who created these genealogical trees so that they could be part of their, I would call it a library, taciturn language and information that would be easily transmitted to other royals that they may want to do business with, that they didn't know or intermarry with, and they know instantly from that and from the coat of arms who they are and where they fit in the overall pureblood hierarchy. And the purebloods operate the top levels of the organization. So hopefully that in itself is something that people will take away and just sort of get a visual. And in that concept, you don't really run out of space for the organizations because there's just so many of them. And so today we're going to talk about the Rosicrucians, and we're going to talk about the Jesuits, and we'll probably talk, given time, more about the Committee of 300 than we covered the last time. So I'm going to be covering off, starting with the Rosicrucians, because to understand the Jesuits and where they fit, and if people were paying attention, I didn't fit them into the tree trunk, which would surprise a lot of people, because a lot of people think the Jesuits are at the top of the secret orders, and
I
they're
thought
not.
they were.
But it'll make some sense, hopefully, when we're done today. So the Rosicrucians are the inner order of an organization that sponsored the complete secret society order that we have as we understand it in the West today. So you have this ancient Masonic order that are royal Masons. These are the royals of all of the kings and the princes and their families. And in the time of the Crusades, in the First Crusade, you have these knight orders that are being created, and there's many of them. They're all interconnected, and they're all part of the sort of knight order system that morphed into the secret societies today. But the most important one was the Knights Templar. And the Knights Templar were made up of the royal families, as we talked about, and two Cistercian monks, or Benedictine monks. And they're sponsored by Saint Bernard, who was a Cistercian monk and a relative of several of the Knights Templar, and intermarried into some of their families. So you have to understand that the organizational structure of our history until recently in the West has been a feudal system, a four-caste system, and they dominated the bloodlines of the churches. So all of the high-level positions in the churches, all the high levels in the government, all the high levels in the armies, all the high levels in the business, and they left the crumbs to a small entrepreneurial class like blacksmiths or bakers and slaves to do the work for them, right? So that's the order that is producing the Anjou family, the de Payen family, the de Bouillon family, that's going to produce the Plantagenet through the Anjou. And they're the ones that are dominating the growth of the Western secret societies. And so the Templars become the most powerful organization in the world. They invent virtually modern banking. They have the largest military. They are the most wealthy. They have loaned money to all of the kings, and they're going to be overthrown. And so there's going to have to be a retort to that, because the royals still want to be able to control things, but they want it decentralized. And that's where we start to get a lot of these different organizations from. So at the core of that, as I said, there is the royal adepts. So like de Bouillon, Anjou, de Payen, they're all from the Lorraine region, which is all Anjou. And they're just
part of the 13 bloodlines, right?
Yes. Yes. And that they are also descendants of the last surviving Merovingian king, Dagobert. So they're carrying that bloodline, right? And now that leads into another rabbit hole that we're not going to chase on that genealogical tree today. But it gives you an idea that this organization is controlled by an organization that is the Order of Sion, or the Priory of Sion. And there's an event that happens in 1187 that causes a split in the Templar lower organization and higher organization, and understanding a lower aspect of the secret society and a higher aspect is part of the organizational structure. So as I talked about the higher level of the Rosicrucian order and the lower level, that's common understanding within a group that you need to understand. And I'll come back to that. But this higher order splits away in 1188 at Geezer's Castle at a polytheist ritual that's called the cutting of the elm. And they're splitting away because they feel the Templars have lost their way. They're too focused on money, they're too focused on their own goals, and they were created as their number one agenda item was to protect Jerusalem, but Jerusalem falls in 1187. And because there's this inner sort of split in terms of the direction that the Templars are going to go, at the cutting of the elm, you have the Priory of Sion that is splitting away. And it's important to understand because these are going to become the first, as we would understand as the Rosicrucians, and I'll come back to that in a minute. So you have this split, and by 1307 you have the fall of the Knights Templar, but not that inner order that had already split away. And the Priory of Sion does not intercede to help the Templars in terms of visible way to make sure that they're not going to be split up. Now they're going to chase after the assets and focus more on that and whatever other knowledge and treasures that the Templars had, but the Templars are going to be broken up. And the Masonic bloodlines we're never going to be in another position again to be that centralized. So after that, you get, as I said, the establishment, whether or not it's the Royal Society, whether or not it's the Illuminati, Freemasonry, all of these different groups. So, but in 1187, you have this separate group that's operating on its own. And it's going to show up sort of in its most visible first representation after the fall of the Knights Templar in about, let's say 1397 to about 1450. And the Rosicrucians order is going to be the power behind the rise of the Ordo Draconis that Vlad the Impaler is most famous for joining. And they're going to be trying to put thrones back in place on continental Europe that are loyal to the polytheist religions and their agenda and anti-Christian. And they want to pursue the pursuits of thought, so the development of knowledge, and it's actually sort of the igniting of the Renaissance. And that's the type of things that these organizations do. They're looking at the end game for the end time, and they want to be positioning their world order all of the time and not being pushed back. So we have some events that start to arise after the fall of the Knights Templar. That we're going to see some more activity of the Rosicrucians and before Ordo Draconis. So they just kind of gone unnoticed. So in 1313, you have a fellow by the name of Dumont who becomes the Grand Master of the exiled Templars in Scotland. And he has sailed off with some of the treasure and knowledge, but not all of it, from the Templars from France at the fall in 1307. And in 1317, you have a founding of a Rosicrucian order in Scotland that is formed by the exiled Templars. These are all high-level adepts. So this Priory of Sion and Rosicrucians, at this point in time, they're essentially the same in royal bloodlines, and they're doing that under the protection of Robert the Bruce, King of Scotland, who has been excommunicated by the Roman Church because he killed his rival in a Catholic church. And so they looked rather poorly on that. And at that time, you're going to have this organization that is governed by 33 invisible adepts, okay, which is a very important number. And we're going to come back to that in a second. But I want to now just sort of go back to the time of the fall of the Knights Templar, so that we can start to understand some of the more important events that are taking place. So in 1309,
I just want to clarify for people, when you say Rosy Cross, you're meaning Rosicrucians, just for
Yes.
people that are new to this.
Yeah, the Rosy Cross is more the ancient sort of name. So yeah, so in 1309, King Denis of the Bourbon dynasty, he is going to take, and he's a king of Portugal, Port of the Grail, nation formed by the power of the Knights Templar for their agenda. He's going to take control of the Knights Templar assets, just as the King of Spain is going to take control of the Templar assets at that time as well. And they're going to form separate orders of new Templars at that time. So they're essentially just changed their name a little bit, and they've become a new order. So you have assets that were in place in Spain and England, now in Masonic royal houses that are really just Templars again. So you have that retaking of the Knights Templar, and you have some of the assets that went to Scotland, and now you also have other assets that are going to go to Switzerland, where most of the money went, and we'll be coming back to that maybe a little bit later if we have time today. So in 1317, King Denis is granted by Pope John the 22nd, the bull, he officially bulled in Toronto, or in Rome, as the Order of Christ. And so this is the new order. And also in 1317, Pope John the 22nd is going to approve the Montesa order in Spain. And that's going to be really important to know when we get back to the Jesuits. Now in 1317 as well, and a lot of things are happening in 1317, you have the 33 invisible ones of the Rosy Cross, heavily weighted to the French families, but obviously you have the de Bruces, which are originally French Norman, and the Sinclairs or the St. Clairs, they're in Scotland. So they're part of that whole bloodline. And you have 33 of them, they're going to sit down with the Pope, and they're going to negotiate with the Pope. And what they want to do is they want to recreate the Templars back into the Roman Church. And so they're negotiating on how that's going to look. And there's an agreement to do so. And they're going to have 33 members that are going to run it. But the Pope at that time says, but none of you are going to run it. I am going to put my own people in there. And of course, that sort of just breaks the whole thing down. Right?
Why did they call them the invisible ones?
Because they like to be invisible for two reasons, particularly at that point in time, to not be seen as easy targets for the wrath of the Roman Church. And they want to be able to control things through other people, like puppeteers, so that it doesn't sort of connect back to them. And we see that MO still today. And that these invisible ones, they're going to go underground, but this number becomes an important number and will eventually be top line bloodlines that are the Council of 33. And then over time, you're going to create the Committee of 300 underneath and the Rosicrucians underneath that. And with the Rosicrucians in about 1600 or so, you start to see names pop up in the Prairie Sion Grand Master list, Rosy Cross Order, which are more educated people, whether or not you've got Isaac Newton or people like Da Vinci is another one, that are running this organization versus the royal bloodlines, which are all like St. Clair's and all the various bloodline names who are running it after 1188. And
tell you, there wasn't much to it. I seen UFOs shooting lasers at the Harbour Bridge, and I saw, and also with the UFO invasion, come mass lawlessness on the streets. I've dreamt it 2 or 3 times.
before that were the Council of Barons that elected the kings for the King of Jerusalem before the fall of Jerusalem. And so you have this council that is, you have these organizations that are going to split over time, but you have, I guess how I would probably, I kind of lost my train of thought there just for a second. You have this situation that's coming up is that their organizations are going to become bigger. So they're going to want to add more layers in there and get some more separation to become the invisible ones. And you'll see that invisible one's name show up in one of the organizations that they create.
Well, Diane, that's mad, that UFO.
In 1662 from the Rosicrucians and the early Freemasonry, as it has just moved into England at that time. It's the Royal Society, which is also called the Invisible College. So the language is sort of consistent, and it's always there. And so you get an official name for this Rosy Cross Order as it's being granted by Robert the Bruce in 1323. So as we start to move forward, they're regrouping, they're starting to set things up. But the problem is they need to create other organizations, right? So they're going to create the Illuminati starting in the 1500s. People see their visibility in the 1700s, but they start before that in Rome. They're going to create the Royal Society in 1662 that we've talked about. And they're going to create Freemasonry, which again is the lower level of that Rosy Cross Order that begins with the St. Clair's in Scotland. And that's going to be the base level over time. And the Rosy Cross Order before they create, and afterwards they split that in the middle because you're creating the Illuminati to create, again, more structure in there. So you see that expanding. And when we look at what they're trying to do is they're decentralizing their organizations, and every organization has an agenda, has a specific role. So like the Rothschilds that are created to replace the Templar banking, they're to do the banking outside the church, and then they'll work on getting all of the banking in the church in another way that is very closely related to what we're talking to. You have the creation of the Royal Society to take care of education and science outside the church, but then they're going to create another organization within the church to get control of that as well. And so everything is for a specific reason, and they all will have branch organizations intersecting into them. So the thing that they need to do next is they need to get a new Templar order reset up within the Catholic Church. They need to get that control back and to sort of push off the power of the popes. Now, you've always got the black nobility involved, and we'll talk a little bit more about them down the road with the Committee of 300, but they want to be controlling things from the inside as well, because not all the popes are going to be their people. And you get a lot of anti-popes that are put in place because the pope that's elected gets kicked out and replaced by a puppet pope from a specific family. So there's lots of intrigue that are always going. So they're always looking for control. And that's why you have to have more offsetting organizations within the church. So they want to set up the New Templars in the church. And of course, they failed to do that in 1317, but that doesn't mean that they were going to stop. So they're going to wait patiently for their opportunity to do this. And so there's going to be a fellow who comes along in the 1520s called Ignatius of Loyola. And he's going to have Mary apparitions. And Mary is a very important part of the Templars, although it's a different Mary than what Christians would sort of venerate. It's more Mary Magdalene and an allegory for Isis and mother goddesses. And so he's going to have several visions with Mary that is going to initiate him into a commission to change the Roman Church from inside, to rejuvenate it in the goal that they want it and he's going to create an army order to do that. But he has a very fledgling order in the beginning, and he's going to meet up with a few other people to be able to do that, to found the organization. But it's going to struggle. But he is going to run into a fellow by the name of Francis Borgia in about 1527 or 1528. And Borgia is going to free him from the inquisitors from jail. And Francis Borgia is a descendant of several popes, at least two that, from my research, and a grandson of a pope. And he's living in Spain, where Ignatius of Loyola, a Basque, which is another rabbit hole, but very consistent with sort of the polytheist nature and organization that he was intending on developing as the new, because what they're trying to do is create the new Babylon, and that's the old Templar dream, to create the new Babylon within the church. So he starts a relationship with Francis Borgia, who is Grand Master and a royal bloodline out of the Basques as well. In the Basque territory, he's a royal bloodline, and he is the Grand Master of the Montesa order that inherited in 1307 all of the Templar assets. So Borgia and the King of France, King Charles at that time, the Holy Roman Emperor, who is the most powerful king of that period, they're going to be working to sponsor Ignatius into becoming an order. So in 1534, you get sort of this formation of the official Jesuit order, the Order of Christ, as they're called. And they've got Peter Farber as one of the famous ones, and you also have Francis Xavier. They're the three sort of founders, but it is Ignatius of Loyola who's the real sort of dynamo to put this thing together. And so it's going to be in 1534 to 1535 that the power and influence through his black nobility, through his pope bloodlines and relationships, is going to get the Jesuits formally organized within the church. And in 1529, King Charles was granted by the Pope, to show you the result of the power, and Borgia is working for King Charles. They're working hand in hand on this. King Charles is granted by the Pope the authority over North America, where the Jesuits are going to be at the forefront down the road, and they're going to control all the information and the colonization going forward. So in 1542, Pope Paul III, he puts an official bull to establish the orders. Now they have complete status, kind of like what the Templars did. By 15, and these bulls are going to be providing authority to the Jesuit church, first over the teachings. And
I'll get pulled over for UFO for drunk flying under the influence.
Teaching of students over schools, and then taking over the seminary schools. So they're gaining control there. In 1565, this Grand Master Royal, not part of the Jesuit order, is going to be made the third leader of the Jesuits. So now you have the Montesa order that's in control of the Jesuits. And in 1572, Pope Gregory XIII is going to grant Borgia and the Jesuits the rights to Vatican banking.
There's a Netflix on the Borgias. It was a series, and Jeremy Irons played the Pope, the Borgia Pope. Very wicked, really good series, but really wicked for so-called Christians. Well, we know that Catholics aren't Christians.
And they do that because of the wars that are going on, sponsored by King Charles and his the king who succeeds King Charles. The name eludes me right now, but they are at war with Naples and Italy, and it's bankrupting the Catholic Church to sponsor the pushback. But there's a peace settlement, but power is being transferred, and in return for that, Spain and Borgia are going to have control of the Vatican banking, but they don't leave it there. They're going to take that Vatican banking to Switzerland, where the Knights Templar sent their assets to the Knights of St. John to get control of the banking and from a place where they could protect it. That's why you have the white cross on the Swiss flag, because that's really the start of the Swiss nation and their first foray into banking. And now in 1572, you have the other banking that is coming over from the Vatican over to Switzerland. And then in the 1900s, late 1900s, you have the Rothschilds locating all of their banking in Switzerland as well. So you see how this sort of all kind of works together in terms of working a specific agenda. So what the Jesuits, as the New Templars, have done is they have created an order that controls the banking. They've created an order that controls the education and the seminary schools. And even though they were disbanded in the 1580s or the 1880s, because they had crossed the bloodlines, and the royalty forced the Vatican to disband them and take all their power away, you now get a resurgence of Mary apparitions with Lourdes and Fatima in succession, right? And apparitions amongst the Jesuits as well. And it's going to lead to the Jesuits being reinstated. And within 20 years, they have all the power that was taken away from them before, and are in place with that today with Jesuit Pope. Now, this is a very powerful organization. People think that they're the most powerful one, but now we need to understand sort of where they fit in. If we understand they were sponsored by the Rosicrucians, the original ones, and that they are now those original ones, the Council of 33, they're either going to report into that or into the order right below, which would be the Committee of 300, or to the pure blood level of the Rosicrucians below that. So we get this term called the Black Nobility that's talked about a lot. And to me, there's like two Black nobilities that people need to keep in mind. One is the larger Black nobility that's throughout Europe, and it's all of the elite bloodlines, also known as Rex Deus, the Rex Deus. But there's also a specific bloodline within Italy of Black nobility as well, and who, when they were putting the Jesuits back in place, were funding them to get control and putting their influence, because the Black nobility also represents bloodlines of the popes that would come from these bloodlines of Italy. And that bloodline typically is what they call the Julia gens. And it's similar to the LB gens that I probably talked about in the first show that we did. The LB gens is sort of the larger European bloodline that goes back to a specific patriarch, but there would be several LB gens as well. And so the Julia gens goes back to like Augustus and Julius Caesar, but back to the bloodlines of the ancient families who take their bloodlines back to Rephaim or Nephilim, Romulus and Remus, who are the offspring of the gods. right? So it's the same, but it's a specific one that sort of operates within Italy, but it's also the same term that's also used in Europe. So you have to sort of understand the families and who they are. And so you have this black nobility that would be part of the larger aspect. So they're going to be reporting higher than the Rosicrucians as we understand them today. And I kind of position them to be answering into either the Committee of 300 and perhaps through the upper end of the black nobility, maybe into the Council of 33 as well. But that's where they sort of fit in. And it's important to understand that there was a time when the Jesuits were created, they were working with Freemasonry and active in a lot of the Freemasonic lodges and stuff. But what happened was a conflict of interest. So the Jesuits wanted to take over, according to the Masonic adepts, the Freemasonic adepts, and that they basically punted the Jesuits out and said, you have your own agenda, you have your own organizations, you need to work on that, and we're going to continue on what our agenda is. So, I mean, the Freemasonic agenda, and we may have mentioned it the last time, they're focused on army, government, and, you know, influencing that, and to work towards a world government, but world government is more specifically for the Illuminati, and plus their other goal is to destroy Christianity. But if you notice, let's say in the Constitution of the US, you have a lot of Freemasonry involvement because that's like the new world. It's the model for the new world order that they were trying to create through the United States for the end time, and also to make them powerful enough to move their agenda, which is why they get so upset when the United States says, no, we have a mind of our own, and we're going to push back against the European influence and do what we want to do. So there's always that sort of conflict that's going on as well. So that's the Jesuit order. They do have a relationship with the other Masonic orders, but their goal is specifically to create the new Babylon within the church.
I love that you brought that up about America. I think even our own history has been altered so much here that people don't realize why and how this country was even founded and by whom, you know, because even people that were taught, excuse me, to admire through school, you know, George Washington, all these founding fathers, you know, they were all secret society members.
Yeah. But if you start to, if you can get an appreciation for how the world works, because this world is controlled by the visible ones and the invisible ones, all working against Christianity and Judaism, then you have a better understanding as to what's really sort of going on. And it's always about their agenda. So you don't look at the superficial motivations the media is putting out there, because they're just putting out the talking points and the propaganda. So it's important to understand that. And another thing to understand about the Jesuits is that when I talked about Peter Farber and Francis Xavier and Borgia, and they met while they were being educated in Paris into the 7 liberal arts, the 7 sacred sciences.
What are the 7 sacred sciences, just for people who may have never heard that before?
Yeah, they're the standard 7 liberal arts in university. We just understand them differently. So basically, you know, you have grammar, you have rhetoric, you have mathematics, you have geometry, you have astronomy, and what ties all of those 7 together is philosophy. That's the theology of the polytheist wisdom that they're teaching. That's why it's absolutely filled with imagery of ancient gods, even though the buildings are like Greek buildings or Roman buildings or Egyptian buildings, everything's named after the gods of the polytheist world. You have degrees they're putting out. You wear robes of rituals at graduate. Everything is immersed in that sort of belief system, and it's designed to lead people away from God. Number one goal. Number two goal is to not give God credit for anything, to degrade God, and to honor the pantheon of gods. And that knowledge was that it merged with the knowledge of heaven, which became so powerful. They created, before the flood, Enochian mysticism that was designed to develop the seven sacred sciences. And Enoch, son of Cain, as opposed to son of Jared, there's two Enochs, funneled the knowledge that he was provided from Cain, who got it from Adam, who learned it in Eden, according to Gnostic and Masonic lore and history, into seven disciplines, and then that merged with the knowledge from the gods, as the Book of Enoch talks about, and all polytheist records around the world testify that the knowledge came from the gods. So it's just the same story, just a different sort of vernacular sort of slant to it. So you have this knowledge that is being developed that they feel cannot go into the hands of the mundane. And so they create a mystical religion that has initiations, that has degrees, and you learn as you go. And everybody's aware of 33rd degree Scottish Rite or third degree York Rite. That's just the beginning. They're the same level. It's just the Scottish Rite has the 3 degrees split into three divisions of 11 that ends up to being the old third degree. If you're going to supervise Masonic lodges, you have to be 5th degree in the old system. And so you're into the Illuminati level at that level. So you can imagine the Rosicrucians are going to be somewhere between 7 and 9 from what I told. And I have no idea how many degrees that there are. I've been told there are 13. I've been told there's 33. I've been told there's as many as 100. So, I don't know. All I know is what we see is just the lower levels, because all of the purebloods are initiated from childhood. And they become adepts before they're adults, and they can't take an adept title till somewhere between 25 and 30 years old. So you may hear the term 32nd degree adept. That is either somebody who doesn't understand the structure of the Scottish Rite, because you have to be 33rd degree, or it's a reference to a pureblood who's too young to receive an adept title. Anyways,
it's true, Diane, isn't it?
The Jesuits who learned the 7 sacred sciences, they took that philosophy, the love of Sophia, the love of the wisdom of the world, theology of polytheism and education as we understand it today. They took that as their lens to interpret the Bible.
We always get a lot.
So they don't read it literally. It's interpreted through polytheism. And the Jesuit view of the knowledge and the sciences is heavily weighted to the Egyptian religion, as is the Rosicrucians, which makes sense because the Rosicrucians started the Jesuits, or at least took control of it and influenced them all the way through. Borgia was even funding Ignatius of Loyola right from 1527 on to make sure that his society had money and he could finish his education and everything else.
So fascinating. Now, in, say, the Rosicrucians or Jesuits, are there levels, degrees? Is there any type of hierarchy like how there is in Scottish Rite, Freemasonry, in those types of secret societies?
Yeah, there would be. I can't say I can tell you how each one of them would do it, but the higher up you go, it's directly related to your bloodline. So once you're into the committee of 300 and up, that's 300 families, just by the way you have it sort of aligned on the tree, it goes down to 33 families and then to 13. So there's families, and then there's additional families, and there's families and branches of the main families, right, that are coming down into those other groups. And the people within those societies, they're going to fit in based on their, yes, through the learnings that they're doing, but it's more based on their purity of their bloodline and or ennobling of that bloodline, which they call scioning, which is grafting in bloodlines from other patriarchs, as in giants and fallen angels. And so when you have talk of, let's say, the Merovingians or the Stuarts, which were considered the two most ennobled dynasties of their ages, that's what they're talking about, is those bloodlines that were grafted in to give them superior nobility.
Talia, if you saw him, I bet you'd recognize him.
Again, so yeah, if you
Let's see if I can find a link.
understand
Diane, don't beat me to it.
at a certain level, it's all about your bloodline purity and which family that you're from, it starts to make more sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And those families are pretty, invisible as well to people. Like, we really grasp on as a society to these lower level families. And even, I think people even have the misconception that, say, Rothschilds are a direct bloodline. And like you said, Plato and some of these other names that we really learn about, they're, maybe you could explain a little bit more about how they kind of fit in. But I know Rothschild, that wasn't even their last name. They even changed that, and you see that with the British royal families, and it's interesting how these people get put in place. And not even
the Bauer family out of Germany was funded by first the German or the bloodlines of the Kaisers, which would include the Hanovers, who changed their name to Windsor in World War I in England, right? So it's that bloodline, and that's when you see the unicorn imagery on the coat of arms sort of merging in, because the Hanovers had two unicorns. The Stuarts had a unicorn and a lion. So everything that's on there is there for a reason, and so today you'll still see the unicorn on the English coat of arms. So when we look at the Committee of 300, that number comes from more like, let's say, the Greek side of polytheist history. They do have a Gnostic religion, which is designed to reunite all of the ancient religions, and I call it global Gnosticism in my first book. And so they're trying to bring it all back to the earliest stages when it was all one religion at one time. They're all branches thereof in polytheism, just different vernacular names for the gods. But with the Committee of 300...
Okay, I just realised Benny Hinn has the same barber as Donald Trump and Kim Young-muk from North Korea. They all use the same barber. Look at them.
They pick their numbers for a reason, and 300, people have always kind of said to me, well, it makes no sense where they would get that number from. And where it comes from is from Greek history. So 300 symbolizes the forces of what we would call evil led by Satan, right? So it's a specific number, and it's that leadership of 300 working together in a hive mind that will be strong enough to overthrow God in conjunction with the fallen angels. And so this is a number that comes from 300 angels. And in their belief system, there are 300 angels that will make up the new Eden. So typically we only understand 200 angels on Mount Hermon, but they've got a 300 number. Now that might be a number because it might be just they have in their records more angels that mated with humans before the flood, or it might be an additional 100 that they add after the flood in a second incursion. Hard to know, because a lot of the imagery comes from this 300 comes from after the flood. So it seems to me an addition to the 200 that we would know that comes out of the book of Enoch. And at that time, 300 was the number that would guard the king. So I would also look at that number as being the people that surround the coming Antichrist, that are going to protect them from the public. He's probably going to come out with this populist sort of attitude, but everybody in front of him in the crowds will be his loyal protectors. So nobody will be able to get at him because they don't want him assassinated. Pythagoras also had, in this sort of imagery and understanding, 300 disciples. So this is a number that sort of comes down through history. And Blavatsky, the founder of Theosophy, which is a religion that was created by the Rosicrucians as a successor to the Gnostic religion that is more their ancient sort of religion and understanding, was a religion that was designed, probably a little bit prematurely, but designed to be the religion of the end time that would merge with science. Because in their belief system, science comes out of the religion, right? And it's the whole reason for the religion was to develop that knowledge. And so 300 is like a trident number to them. And what I mean by that, a trident is like the three prongs of Poseidon or some of the ancient gods, and as a weapon. And it's 3 in 1, so 300, right? In terms of how they work their sacred sort of geometry, and they look at that as the perfect unity in their Tao, which again is a word that sort of comes out of Taoism out of China, which again represents their global Gnosticism and the recognition of everything being the same religion. And it's also a representation in the Tao and that perfect unity that is sort of embedded into their Egyptian and Aryan crosses as they. But anyways, we're going down a rabbit trail. But you get the idea that it is a very symbolic number, but an important number that's related to the Godfathers.
Bas, do you reckon Al Nephilim, the 300, that's an interesting theory.
Right. And the 300, as you would understand that, of families, original families produced because they produced a giant line from each angel.
So fascinating. All this stuff to me, it just blows my mind that it goes back so far, how long these organizations have been not only established, but working together, yep. You know, and they've had the same goal for so long.
Yes.
Continue after thousands of years, we still don't know about them as a society. We're not taught them. And I mean, it goes back to what you said. If you can control the banking, the government, the school system, the military, you know, you can control everybody. You can produce your own narratives, and all the way down to what you talk about with the media, you know. So you see how they've had this reign over society for so long that now we don't even question what we're taught. We're celebrated for learning all this stuff. We get degrees, and like you said, it's rituals that we're participating in, essentially.
Yeah. And then one last thing as it relates out of Greek history, the 13 families. You know, 13 is obviously an important number, but for me, it was always how did they sort of arrive at the 13 families?
Yeah.
And so what they look at is 12 plus 1 to get that. And so 12 is an important number, particularly with the parent gods and the number of gods that ruled both before and after the flood, and the council of the gods as the top ones. And you would have Satan as the additional one. And typically that's understood as two other gods immediately under Satan. Typically that would emulate at the god level a mother goddess and then an offspring god as well. So to create a triune, which is that 3 in 1 number, but it's a counterfeit triune. And then you would have probably the chiefs of the tens, as Enoch described them as being those other 10 at the top. So again, all of it is built on their history, and they reflect it in everything that they do. And the Committee of 300, controls a lot of organizations in terms of what's going on in the world today. And so organizations that they heavily work with and influence would be another one that was very powerful within the Roman Church, called the Order of St. John, the Knights of St. John. And it's changed a little bit in the last couple of decades, but throughout their history, you had to be, if you remember, you had to be a direct royal blood. You wouldn't be the first son, but you might be second, third, or fourth son. That would be the members that would make up that sort of organization. They also have status at the UN. If most people don't, they have basically country status, the Knights of St. John. They influence banking and economics around the world through the church, and they influence politics. And so the Committee of 300 is handling a lot of the economics in their agenda. So you would have not only the Rosicrucians that would be answering to them, but you would have higher level organizations working on the economics of the world that would answer into them, like the World Economic Forum people, the Davos people. They are completely funded and report back to the Committee of 300. The Bilderbergers would be an organization that intersects, and both of those organizations kind of do the same thing. They get together about once a year, and they get all the lower levels and the ones who want to move up in the world, particularly next generation, by intermarriage for their offspring. They're going to get their marching orders and do the agenda for them for the next year. So you're going to have the International Monetary Fund that answers into them. You're going to have the World Bank that answers into them. The Club of Rome answers into them, who have divided the world into 10 groups of nations so that they can bring about the world government, as in the 10 kings of the end time of the Seventh Empire. They have a very, very sort of powerful position in terms of moving free trade, banking, funding, and now they're linking. This is, obviously where the black nobility live, and then there'd be a few families that would be in the Council of 33, and then, I would say probably at least 2 or 3 families of the original Roman black nobility in the top 13.
Wow. Are there some Rosicrucians? Those it can be bloodline or people that are partial bloodline that can be in that one. Okay. Yeah. And then Committee of 300, are those families all bloodline?
All bloodline. Yep. Everything up is bloodline. Top half of the Rosicrucians and up is all purebloods.
And are you able to recite, do you know offhand who the 13 bloodlines are for people who are very new to this? And a lot of these names, a lot of people have never heard of.
Not off the top of my head. And I always come up with more names. I put 13 that there's a consensus in the book, but I mean, the 13 I put in the book is more the sort of the Rex Deus part of it. So as opposed to including some of the Julian families, right? So it's really hard to nail down which are the top ones. But I mean, you're going to have like the Orsini is going to be up there. There's going to be a few other ones that are in Italy. You're going to have the Anjou for sure. Whether or not the junior offshoot Plantagenet is in there, a lot of people say they are, but they may not be. St. Clair's are definitely in there. You have to put the Hanover Windsor family that's in there. So there's a lot of names that sort of keep bouncing around, and that's, because I think what we get is the leakage out of the Council of 33. But to me, the older the family bloodline is more likely to be part of the European 33.
it's fascinating going over this. And I know people listening on my show specifically, I've had a lot of guests on my show that are from some type of bloodline family, whether it was a direct or some type of inbreeding between bloodlines. But
Yep.
it's very fascinating how they maintain that in a sense of the child abuse systems that go through the lineages to keep control over these families so they don't break apart, so they make it so people don't leave. And incest, you brought up incestual families, how big inbreeding is in all of these generational families. And that in itself too, it's not only disgusting and an abomination, but that's something else that they've been able to maintain for all of these thousands of years, is the integrity of keeping that bloodline and how important that is to them.
It is, and they have to manage it, because if you don't, you get blood diseases like hemophiliac disease or Habsburg jaw disease, and other diseases. So they have to keep regenerating that pool. So that's why you have outside branches that are intermarrying to put new sort of bloodline in, and then you'll get some sort of intersecting bloodlines that will go further to the top. So what do I mean by that, for an example? Because most people say, oh, I'm not sure what you mean by that. Well, Princess Diana has Stuart bloodlines, but it's not as pure as Prince Charles's, the third bloodline was, or King Charles now, I should say, bloodline is. But you need that so that you don't get sterilization or any of the other blood diseases. So, with the children with William and Harry, they basically have rejuvenated the genetics in that bloodline, right? So, but that's how over time the giants lose a lot of their looks after their godfathers that they would have inherited, and they lose their size because they had infertility issues. And we know this from the terrible ones, as they're talked about in the Bible. And that's the Hebrew word erit, or eretim, as the male plural would be. And they're defined not only as giants and strong ones and things like that, but they're also in their definition described as having fertility issues and being childless. So the original Rephaim, after the flood, they needed to intermarry to preserve their race. But they've controlled how much of that they're going to do so that they keep their bloodlines as pure, because that's how they decide that they are superior beings as the divine offspring of the fallen angels.
And I mean, it brings up other points too, where you were talking about the genealogical tree, but you look at how that manifests physically in our society, with everybody these days taking DNA tests and giving away that data to people who are looking for, like you said, continual ways to keep these bloodline families going. Yeah,
it's just, and everybody in a bloodline family, they are assigned a specific function. So once you're in that, it's really hard to get out of it. We've seen, a large break with Harry, but what we don't know is whether or not he's done with that break yet. Maybe he just wants more power or whatever, and we don't know what's going on. But and maybe the intermarriage wasn't quite whom they would have preferred that he selected for ongoing generations, so to speak. So, but it is such a key component when you're understanding the secret societies and how things work in the world. So if you want to know what's going on in the world today in terms of politics, I mean, you have to get beyond what they tell us about Putin. You have to get beyond what they tell us about Xi and get into who are they really and what are they trying to do.
Yeah, and even how you said how they install people in society, you can really understand too who the enemy is by understanding what sector of this big secret society organization manages what part of society. So that, like you said, Freemasons oversee the army. So you hear a lot about how there's these Satanists and a lot of corruption that happens with these sergeants and just really high military personnel. And so, when you can connect those dots too, you can kind of see who the enemy is in certain areas of society.
Yeah, exactly.
It's fascinating. For the Black nobility, are there certain secret societies? I think you mentioned a couple, but which secret societies, or is it all of them, report directly to that one?
Well, the Black nobility are part of the Committee of 300 and the Council of 33 and the 13 families. So everything to do with the Roman Church is Black nobility. Everything to do with the Roman Church banking is Black nobility. Now, they will also work with the other European families in the overall organizations. But they have a special spot because they're the Roman bloodline, and that's, set up the last beast empire that's going to reestablish the next beast empire.
Gotcha. And I know that there's a lot of people too who think that the Freemasons are an extension of the Jesuits, and I appreciate that you bring a different perspective to that because it makes a lot of sense from the history that you've discovered.
Yeah, and in the book that I get some information from is a book called The History of Freemasonry by Albert Mackey, an adept who wrote in the 1850s. He talks about this relationship in that history and tries to, at least from whatever his agenda is, set that straight. And this is from the 1800s, so it doesn't have the same lens that we have today. It was how they were created, why they separated, but Freemasonry is an older organization than the Jesuits. The Rosicrucians are an older organization. Jesuits are more come lately because they wanted to reestablish the Templars and why they're called the New Templars within the Roman Church.
Gotcha. And these different organizations that we're talking about today, the Committee of 300, Jesuits, Black nobility, do they have a specific geolocation on the planet where they specifically are overseeing or reside, or are they sprinkled all throughout every country and all over the world?
They're sprinkled all over the world, and so as the colonization went, particularly through the French and English empires, you had immigration of, let's say, a fourth son or a fifth son, and they were sent to every state, province, city, town that was going up over time to control that local area as well, or to be part of it and to create the organizations that would sort of answer up to the state level and then the national level and then back to European centers like London or Paris.
Gotcha. And with the Jesuits, you had mentioned the Pope. We've had a few that have been Jesuit. Is that important for some reason that the person?
Well, it's the first Jesuit is with Francis.
Gotcha.
And he is called a Black Pope as a Jesuit. And a Pope would normally be understood as a white Pope. But in this, we have a Black and a white Pope. So you have, I believe it was Nostradamus, a Rosicrucian, who predicted 3 Antichrists, and that there would be, before Antichrist comes along, and there would be a Black Pope that would be the last Pope of the Catholic religion. And so most people thought that was a black skin-colored one, but you have to understand the imagery of the organizations that they're likely referring to. So my understanding is that he didn't say how many Black Popes, but that the one that converted Catholicism would be the Black Pope. Now that gets sort of merged with the with the prophecies of Malachi, the prophecies of the popes as this being the numbered as the last one, or Peter the Roman. But again, that's not canon either, so you can't really, but it's interesting, but how close is it? We don't know. But I don't think Francis is Antichrist. I don't think Francis is the false prophet. I think he's doing an incredible job of making a preparation for perhaps another one. And I always thought Francis, he might be the sort of the anti-pope, as he would also be called, which is, he is a replacement pope in that understanding, just as he replaced Benedict. So in a number of areas, he could be that last pope, but that's not the false prophet who makes the way for Antichrist.
Gotcha. And what about when you say black pope, what is that for people who are new to black pope, white pope? Is there a gray pope? I've heard that too from people. And why is one presented as kind of the front, and why would they hide these other popes?
Great question.
Colors are very, very important in secret societies and polytheism. And so the white pope was, as the children of light, the pure knowledge makes you pure type of thing. But then you have to create other colors for other aspects of leadership. So they're leadership titles of organizations within the church. So a black pope was the title for the Jesuit leader. He has other titles as well, but black pope is what he's recognized as. So I wouldn't get too caught up in that. It's just that it's one of those interesting things that one notes as you sort of look to see whether or not are we in the fig tree generation and how things are sort of shaping up.
Yeah, it's fascinating because you don't hear a lot of people talk about the different popes, but we're aware that there is one, but it's interesting how there's more than one. Do you think, Mary, that
pope is just another word for a bishop, right?
Yep, essentially. Now, do you think that with going off of what you were saying with how they are constantly trying to maybe create new bloodlines or just replenish them in a sense after a certain amount of time, do you think that there's still, say, Nephilim breeding and things like that happening today? With what you know about what you've researched, that they're still doing these things with these, sort of supernatural beings that can cross over?
Yeah. Well, they certainly, within their development of knowledge, are always trying to create that with the new man, which was, Nostradamus' second Antichrist figure with the Nazis, right? That they wanted to create and if they got it right down the road, I mean, they were doing it through intermarriage to keep those bloodlines pure, which again is exactly what this whole group does in all the different layers and levels. But if they got it right with their knowledge, they would be able to backwards engineer DNA and blood types to recreate the real bloodline to create these demigods again. That's what they're what one of their aims were. Frankenstein in their literature is a recreation of that new man through technology and knowledge and things like that. So they would always like to get back there. There's only two ways you can get there. It's artificially, which the mark of the beast implant might promise for immortality, but it won't be a true original demigod. So other than that, the only way you can get those replenished bloodlines is to have fallen angels procreate again with humans to create more of the pure bloodlines, because unless they found a way to keep these giants in stasis, which is what some people believe, and I won't rule it out, but I don't have any evidence to that. All you have is the descendants, right? And so unless there's another recreation, and I think that's possible that might happen, because as we get closer to the end time, they've got nothing to lose. And it would make sense that they would bring that back. And they also have to deal with the demons as well to create bodies for them. So it's another reason they need to create an oiketerion, or a dwelling place for the spirit, so that these disembodied spirits of giants can interact in the world again. So I suppose it's possible, but the Rephaim after the flood, I mean, they were different than the ones that were killed before the flood. They're not as big, they're not as powerful, and they have infertility issues, whereas the Nephilim did not. So is it possible that they were, they weren't bound to the 120 years that Genesis 6:3 talks about? Perhaps, but not likely. So they would have had maybe longer lifetimes, but I think over time they went back to the 120 years like all people on the earth. And I don't think you could hide a giant of that size anymore. Unless they're in the earth, off the earth, or in another dimension. But as you say, these beings could cross dimensions. As the Ugaritic texts talk about the Raphaim, the Raphaim, which is the root word for Rephaim. And just as we get the word passengers or travelers that cross over, it's the Hebrew word avar that shows up in Ezekiel 39 for the mighty ones. So it's possible. I would think that as we get closer, you might see a recreation, but I lean more against survival. I just don't rule it out.
Yeah, no, that's great, because I know there's different speculations on how the Nephilim may or may not exist today, and it's a fascinating theory, I guess, to dive into, to see how they might be using the spiritual realm to their benefit, or to
Well, here's something that people might find interesting is Antichrist is called the son of perdition. And that's a very interesting term. I mean, Judas is also called a son of perdition, as somebody who is going to go to eternal punishment. But son of perdition is rooted in the same series of words and directly derives off of Apollyon, the destroyer that comes out of the abyss. And Antichrist is also said to be one that once was, now is not, and he comes up out of the abyss. And so you wonder, is he an actual, is he a descendant of, Azazel, who I think Apollyon Abaddon is, or is that just more of a spiritual thing that's going on with maybe taking on demon spirits or angelic spirits, so the Avatara aspect to make that happen? I don't know, but I find that.
And vast 2 lightning strikes, let it be established with 2 or 3 witnesses. 2 strikes hit the beacon. There it is. Satan's come down as lightning.
Very specific terminology that is, and I don't believe there's coincidences that link back to a bad.
Dobius was a typo. It was did you see?
And Apollyon.
Wow, I did not know that. I bet a lot of other people didn't either. That's very fascinating, and definitely brings up, a lot of potential theories or thoughts on that too.
Yeah, exactly. And also Antichrist receives a mortal head wound. Is that the time where either, Azazel enters into him?
I hate typos. They can make you sound really dumb.
To give him more power? Or does a demon spirit come up out of the abyss that is going to share a body with Antichrist, or take over that body to make him heal and become the true Antichrist? It just starts to really open up things, because you look further down in Revelations and you see these demons coming out of the mouth of Antichrist and the false prophet to gather everybody. So some of the things that we might see will just make our mind bend if we're still here to see some of these things unfold. I doubt whether Christians will be here to watch the demons come out of Antichrist's mouth, but you sort of get the idea that this is going to be things that if we're not prepared for, you're going to be deceived. in that the Antichrist is going to make you believe that he's the true Christ, because they're going to try and change the times. So he's got to have a counterfeit Armageddon, for example. He has to do a counterfeit resurrection. He has to counterfeit everything that Jesus did. So he's going to look like a Messiah, but there's going to be multiple Antichrists too. So we have to be very, very careful. So yeah, so there's always...
Yeah, and a seagull attacked the other one. As he let two, I think he let it go on Peace Day, whatever he calls Peace Day. And one got attacked by a crow, and one got attacked by a seagull.
That sort of possibility that there could be a recreation of the giants, or definitely a reappearance of the disembodied spirits for sure. And we do have the descendants. What's also interesting in Daniel 2:43, you have in the King James Version translation, you have this rising end time empire. And those kings of that empire, those 10 toes, because that's the metallic empire prophecy, are going to mingle their seed with humans. That is a very bizarre passage. And even when you take it back to Hebrew, it's either physically mingling two different races, or it's a mingling of the spirit, as in a demon possession or avatara that is going on. And so you wonder about whether or not there is going to be somehow a recreation of giants, or giants show up and then they're going to produce more offspring, or is it just the descendants of these people who keep their genealogies and consider themselves the superior ones? As you know, Psalms 21, I think verses 8 through 11 is really eye-opening on the bloodlines, that there is a fruit, an offspring, a bloodline in the time of the wrath that is going to be separated and destroyed from the children of men in the time of the wrath. And so you get a few passages in the Bible that suggest it's either, and again, you can go either way. For the most part, I tend to lean towards descendants of the giants as opposed to new giants. But because it's going to be so crazy, we can't rule it out. So I think it's the descendants of these giants that are ruling these things since all throughout our history, through the royal families and the nobility class, that are being talked about. But I won't say that with sort of absolutism, because they could be recreated or they could have saved some. We don't know what's going on in Antarctica or in the earth or in another dimension, or however it may be done, but it will be like the days of Noah. So somehow, some way, I think there's going to be a presence of those giants, but I lean more towards demons being given bodies, and the descendants of generations later, descendants of these giants.
And this is again why it's so good that Christians especially understand this, going back to what you said about understanding who your enemy is and understanding how they utilize the sections that they rule against us. I don't know if you saw this, Gary, but I was just remembering it whenever you were speaking. I saw this, I think it was on TikTok or something. There was some video that somebody took of that one show. It's called American Horror Story, I think.
Yeah.
And the season is called Apocalypse, and I think it just came out recently, and there's an Antichrist in there. And so we know that they program things on TV, and I was like, wow, that's a very interesting American Horror Story series to come out in, whenever it was, 2022 or this year.
Yeah.
But if you haven't seen that, you should look into it, because it definitely aligns with what you're saying about where we're at. We know that they tell us what's going on in the media, right?
Yep, they like to forewarn us of whether or not it happens exactly on their timetable or not. It probably doesn't. But we do know Antichrist will try and change the times. That's like the book of Daniel says. So They're going to try and bring about the end time before the ordained time. And when I look at what the Committee of 300 is doing these days, and particularly with the Davos crew, and then with the G and the B20 that met for the first time in the fall, and then the Davos summit that they're doing today. I mean, they are doubling down on a new reset to get that done. They're doubling down on merging into the green movement. They're doubling down, particularly at the G20 and the B20 by the statements that came out, merging and reintroducing the international vaccine and medical passport that's going to have ability to track everywhere you go. And they're looking at two different options, the Apple version and the Alibaba version, and it's going to be merging in your social credits as all part of the same system, and that they're presenting this new passport to the WHO organization that they fully expect is going to pass this as the universal world passport that's going to be required to move around the world. They're organizing this beast system all the time. So even though they get pushbacks, they get failures, they never stop, and they will never stop. And so they will eventually bring this about. And it's that beast system that comes about through Babylon that is in place first, which is going to really screw people up, because they're not going to expect the beast system until Antichrist takes power at the midpoint of the last 7 years. So, but there's something that changes with this mark that people have to take. But that doesn't mean there won't be some sort of implant system beforehand. And Davos in 2018, I think it was, we're talking about this implant system that they said people are going to demand that they're going to present, because it's going to provide at the gene level and lower with POTS a complete ability to provide vaccines, to provide medications of every sort that's linked into this central system, and give you essentially immortality through digitally medicating you. And people, they said they're going to deliver it through the healthcare organization because people are going to demand it.
Create the problem, then create the solution, right?
Yeah. So then you go and you create the pestilences. You start to do the contrived catastrophes of the sorrows, the beginning of sorrows, the birth pangs that are pestilence, that are earthquakes, that are famine, and are wars and rumors of war, so that they can bring down the borders and create this world government and world religion, so that they can evolve to the next level and become gods, because that's their ultimate goal.
And you see that happening, like with the examples that you said, and also you're seeing businesses starting to be card only, you know, and you're seeing all this crypto stuff, and you're seeing that they take away our options to use cash too.
And they need a currency that's going to be designed with this super technology that's still evolving. So it needs to be, and I think that's why they let cryptocurrency go for a while to get that technology developed. Now they're moving through Federal Reserve banks around the world to take control of that as part of that beast system. So we're going to see what I would call birth pangs of the beast system all the way through, just as we've seen it develop. Those are all birth pangs. It gets stronger, and more developments or more events of it more often the closer we get the last 7 years. So I think you're going to see that type of beast system put in by Babylon, but it won't be the mark of the beast, but it's building towards that. So everything will be in place when Antichrist usurps power.
Now, with the World Economic Forum, is that part of any of these secret societies, kind of a branch off of it, or is that
Committee of 300? Okay.
And are any of the people that are involved with that, are those any bloodlines, or is that all more kind of puppets to, I guess?
Yeah, they're the puppets. So if you and look at it this way, in that two-tiered system, right? So the Bilderberger organization, which answers to the Committee of 300 as well, it has two levels. It has the the bloodline level. So you've got like the princes of, who own Shell and, from the Dutch and that are operating at the top level. And then you have these other people underneath. What I don't see at the World Economic Forum is any royals there at all. So they're taking a very invisible approach there. You're only seeing the lower level. So even with, what's his name? Schwab is the guy who runs it. Don't know whether he's got very high bloodlines or not. That's not really the point. But you can believe he's answering to the bloodlines. That's for sure.
That makes sense. I think that's an organization too that a lot of people I see post about, that they're running the show, and it's like, gosh, if you only knew that they're how low they are on this, and they have that much power, and they're not even anywhere close to being towards the top.
Yeah, so like the Rothschilds are visible, right? And they're the face of banking outside the church. But as we talked about earlier, you mentioned there were the Bauer family who changed their name to the Rothschilds, who were funded, and they've intermarried over the last 300 or 400 years, but they're not the pure bloodlines because they're visible. And when they talk about doing a great reset, this is only money that is going to be reset and wiped out, what we would call on the books, so visible money, right? So if people think that people like Bill Gates are super rich, that's nothing. I was when I was doing research for the book in the early 2000s, at that time the off the books wealth was estimated, and as a thought to be a conservative estimation of somewhere at that time of 300 to 500 trillion. You can only imagine what it would be today. So that money will be there after they take all our money and wealth away and take all of our land away in exchange for relieving the debt loads. And then the people who have the money that is visible today, they'll earn that money back very quickly because they'll be rewarded with running the oligarchical companies around the world, and they'll make even more money, and it won't take long. But you can expect them to say, we're going to take everybody's money to pay off all the debts, and we're going to reset everything. They're going to do it in a religious way, as in a jubilee. So it's going to be a religious sort of nature that they're talking about doing it in. But you won't own anything.
And you'll
pay
be
rent. Yeah, you'll be back in the feudal system.
It's really scary, and how they present it. So many people are going to buy into it, which is the sad part, because they're so desperate. We have these trauma bonds with these, the faces of these agendas, and we don't like them. We know that. We know a lot of people know that they're not good people, yet we latch onto them, and they give us the solution to the problem that they've created. And unfortunately, a lot of people are going to be deceived in this time.
They will be. They will be, and for good reason. So, and hopefully what this does, like what we're talking about today, gives you an idea how well organized the enemy is. And so the only way we can do it, in as you were discussing in your prayer, we need to put on the armor of God, and we need to understand that churches do not teach prehistory and they do not teach prophecy for the most part. So they're not providing the context to the times that we're living in, and they're not preparing the flocks for what's coming. And many of them will be deceived as well that are running it. So we won't be able to trust our church leaders. So it's important for us to educate ourselves and get ready for what's coming. But even so, it's going to be so crazy. I mean, and I would cite as an example on that would be that Jesus had mentioned in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and the epistles of, and Paul in the epistles of, not Paul, but in the epistles of John, so John, that there would be multiple antichrists, plural. So for us to be naming every president that comes along, or every leader of France or Greece or whatever, I mean, all we're going to do is lose our credibility. And there's going to have to be one antichrist that rises up to such level that the true Antichrist is going to say, I'm beating him in my counterfeit Armageddon, and take credit for saving the world and introducing the millennium, which Antichrist will counterfeit and do. And so we also need to understand that every country and religion has this prophecy of a Messiah. So whether or not it's Lord Maitreya or the new Buddha out of Hindu religion, or the Mahdi that comes out of the Sunni and the Shia that just have preferences or differences as to who the Mahdi will be and who they lead. Because one won't be leading the other, that's for sure, in terms of the religious sects. So you have this all over the world. So you're going to have a lot of people, and you're going to have this Gog war, which this alliance of countries that lines up with the same timing and descriptions as Joel 1 and 2 and Revelation 9, which is going to look like Armageddon, that Antichrist is going to take credit for winning.
And again, so many people are going to be very deceived by that. And I hear that all the time too. There's so many people. This person's the Antichrist, and this person's the Antichrist, and this president, and this person. And it's like, geez, and I think part of that too, it's going to desensitize people to not believe anything when it's finally here. Everybody's going to have heard it so many times that they're going to just think, oh, it's just another false flag.
Exactly. And that's why it's important to understand the signs. So when we understand those sorrows that Jesus lays out, that they get stronger throughout the fig tree generation, if you roll that forward to the seals, at that point, around the start of the last 7 years, maybe just before, you have 25% destruction of all of the people, of everything that's on the earth. So much so that in Revelation 6 as well, it talks about the princes and the rulers running into their caves because they think it's actually the day of the Lord, which is going to be Armageddon 7 years later. And it's not done yet. So when you roll forward into the trumpet judgments, you're going to have that war that I talked about as the counterfeit Armageddon, an army that has not seen before of that size, as Joel 1 and 2 talk about, 200 million man army, as Revelation 9 talks about, after the abyss has been opened, and you get all of these creatures that are like these biological weapons that are created that we're just now getting the capability to start doing, or oikotarians for the demonic spirits, the disembodied spirits of the giants, perhaps to operate on. And you get this war that is unimaginable, that is led by Gog, the chief prince of Meshech. And Gog doesn't come out of the table of nations. Magog does, as the prince of Magog, or Gog of Magog, and the chief prince of Meshech. Meshech is the sort of root word that Moscow would take its etymology back to as part of the Tsar dynasty of the Putian dynasty. And Gog doesn't show up in the table of nations.
Oh, man.
But Gog is a name that is defined in both the Greek definition.
Man, that is such a typo. I wrote they've already developed a vax that shuts down the side of your brain, not Tyrone. That's such a stupid typo. So they've already developed a vax that shuts down the side of your brain when you think of spiritual matters. And if that shuts down your brain that lights up, that means there's no access to God, you can't repent, and you're doomed. I think that's going to be the mark, the actual vax.
Of Gog in the Old Testament as an end-time Antichrist figure. Not the Antichrist, but a Antichrist. And Gog, in Greek mythology, is the son of Iapetus, the parent god that Poseidon takes over after the flood in his position, along with Magog and Albion are also sons of Iapetus. So we have a name of a giant that comes out of Greek mythology that's in the Bible that is talked about as leading this war And then you start to wonder, is this going to be a king of one of the Eastern empires, likely Russia, that is going to have a leader that's going to have a demonic spirit that comes from God as possessing that guy to create that war? I mean, it's going to be very confusing.
Yeah, and it's already very confusing, especially with all the psychological warfare that's always being thrown in our face about everything else, you know, then trying to narrow in and hone in on this agenda instead of being distracted by all the other stuff that is being thrown at us all the time. It's so easy to do that. And then we really get pulled away from this big picture, which, like I said, nobody explains this better than you, Gary. And this was just jam-packed with information. These secret societies, they really do run everything. You know, I know it's made up of the families who ultimately do, but these really are invisible organizations. And I love how you put it that way, because that really is what it is. It's not just some little club where people are meeting. It's a legit organization. And if there's one thing that the enemy has been doing better than us, who are on the side of trying to combat it, they're very organized, where they throw all the division tactics at us, and you see it works. You know, we have a really hard time on our end coming together against them, you know, but being empowered with this information, I think, is the best way to throw all of that drama aside and say, wait a minute, the enemy is the one telling me to hate the person next to me, you know, it's the person on TV throwing all these tactics on me. I need to band together with the people around me. I need to learn all of this so we can combat it together, you know, and that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, and watch how the establishment rises up against anybody that's pushing back, who has any influence or power against the world order. They just rise up collectively all over the world to try and destroy them. And they have the ability to do that because they are in control.
Absolutely. And so, as always, Gary, I appreciate you coming on here. Is there any closing thoughts about these topics, or just any words that you want to pass on to people listening before we close up for today?
Yeah, I would say that the thing that we don't want to do is get too caught up in it, right? It's interesting, but we don't want to get caught up in it too much, because that in itself becomes a bit of a trap. We have to be able to be sitting back and say, we know what's going to happen. We think it would be now, but it could be further down the road. And we need to prepare. And so we need to be able to communicate things to people in a way that, even if they're not ready today to accept things, that as they see more of what comes out of what you were talking about, that there is a pattern here, that they'll maybe want to take that at that time and come back to you, or dig more into it for themselves. So I call it planting seeds. And I understand nobody wants to, who hasn't learned about some of these things, they don't want to learn about. I understand that. I mean, you know, when I got onto this whole giant thing in prehistory, I was logging for prophecy narratives, so I could understand all the different sort of prophecy narratives. And you know, as you're going through the logging of it, Genesis 6 comes up pretty fast, and I'm running across these giants. I'm going, oh, I don't want nothing to do with that. That's crazy talk. I'm just going to try and ignore that if I can. But giants sort of kept coming up, and I found that I couldn't ignore it. And that the Bible is such a supernatural book that we shouldn't find that surprising. But we've been prepared to only accept things that we're allowed to accept, that's supernatural, that's in the Bible, not all of it. And so we need to sort of understand how people are thinking. This is, even when they're ready to have a hard look, it's that it's a threshold that they have to cross. It's this cognizant dissonance that we all go through, and we decide, are we going to push through to learn more, or are we going to fall back? And I would encourage people to push through, but understand how difficult that is. And people are going to have to process that in their own way, but we can be sort of saying, hey, you know, what's going on in the Russia war isn't what the news is talking about, because it has nothing to do with what Putin's motivation is and what he's trying to accomplish. And if you don't understand that, you don't understand the war. If you don't understand why the West is so dead set against Putin, you don't understand what's going on in the world. And now I'm sorry I opened up a door. I probably should explain that a little bit. So Putin wants to put together the old empire of the Russians, the ancient Scythians, the giants. The original czars come out of Kiev, the Putyanin dynasty. And the Putyanin name comes out of nowhere in about 1850 with his grandfather. Typically, and that was in the Ukraine where his grandfather was born, in Kiev. And in Kiev, the Putyanin family had a tradition, and I'm sure it's a tradition amongst a lot of royals, that if you had children out of wedlock, they were not going to get the full benefits of a bloodline or the full name, but they would get part of the name. So Putin name comes out of nowhere. Before 1850, there is no Putin name anywhere in Russia or the Ukraine. So he gets part of the name, and then his father moved to St. Petersburg, which is how he shows up in Russia, and then he joins the KGB, and the rest is history when Putin grows up. If you understand, he believes he's a bloodline, that he wants a larger role for Russia in the New World Order, and he wants his rightful recognition as a bloodline, and that he's not going to destroy Kiev unless he has to, because that's holy ground. If you understand why he's bringing in the Constantinople Eastern Orthodox Church, if you understand why he's bringing back all of the heraldry, whether or not it's Vladimir the Great with the statues, who was a Putyanin, the Putyanin bloodline established the czars in Moscow, which was taken over by the Romanovs as what I would call a junior shoot of the Putyanin, just like the Plantagenets is a junior offshoot of the Anjou. That was then totally wiped out by communism, which was created by the European Western royals to get rid of a more pure bloodline. And then the Western royals used the same thing to get rid of the Chinese bloodline with communism. And they also utilized the Nazis to make sure there wasn't going to be any more of the Kaiser bloodline in Germany. And it's all social masonry that was created by the Rosicrucians. So if you start to understand what's behind things, you'll understand what's going on in the world, why there's this pushback of this rivalry between the bloodlines, because there can only be one Antichrist family that's going to rule the world in the end. It's like the old Highlander series, there can only be one, which is, again, a sort of a Nephilim bloodline, take the head, get the energy, allegory, fairy tale system from the fairy side of their literature. That there is this rivalry that's going on and will continue to go on, but that there will be a pushback from the East. And so you're going to see Xi create his empire because he comes from the Chinese bloodline of the Chinese monarchy. Xi is short for Xia, Xia, of the Western branch of the Xia dynasties, which produced all of the Chinese dynasties. He's back in power. He's there for life now. So you can start to see things sort of shaping up, and you can see that alliance forming. And you've got what I would think is 5 toes forming in the East that is going to push back against the West, the European families, and say, we're in favor of the New World Order, the Nephilim World Order, but not in your image. We're going to be equal players, and they're going to force that. And that's why there's going to be those wars and rumors of wars as those empires start to set up all around the world. So it starts to bring context into what's really going on, but you can't take the face value of the fake news who are selling you propaganda to hide it from you, because they are globalists. They want the New World Order. And anybody who opposes it, they will try and destroy and will not give any time for publicity for.
Thank you for all of that. And that was such an important point to just say, don't spend your time in fear. Don't spend your time worrying. That's not a productive use of this time when we know what's coming, you know? And again, one of the best ways to learn about all of this and in such a way that is palatable, it's chronological in a lot of ways, and it puts things into context in a way that we can understand is Gary's book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy. And Gary, remind us again where we can contact you, where people can get your books, and where you're at.
So the best way to get a hold of me is through my website, the Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's Genesis 6, the number 6conspiracy.com. And on that website, under the news and media section, there is a little sentence that says, if you would like to schedule Gary for an interview, click here. That has a click on to my email address. So you can send a message. It will come through to me as an email. And if you have a question or want a document that I was talking about, like I have a great document on the Chinese bloodlines with Xi. I have a great document on Putin. Just name it by topic, and if I've got that, I'll send it to you at no charge. If you want to ask a question, I'll get back to you as well. It might take me a month or so to get back to you, but I will get back to you. And if you want to get...
Okay, that's that one over. Watch this, guys. These guys give me a big shout out. I'm not going to show the whole video, just when they give me a shout out.
I think they've crossed over 100,000 on TikTok.
Jeez.
And people are getting saved. People are asking questions. People are learning. People are getting discipled.
Yeah.
I mean, they're ministering to people.
That's awesome.
They're ministering to people.
So great, man. Wow.
You know, and I think there's...
Where are they at?
They're in Red Cross, North Carolina, out there in the middle of nowhere.
Wow.
About 45 minutes from Charlotte.
Very cool.
Man, thank you.
Very cool, man. That's awesome.
Dave's like, I'm gonna give you this DVD because I'm sick of trying to get you guys to understand.
It's knowledge. Well, you know, man, that's you know, when you guys were at the was it 600 or 700 subscriber point?
Yeah.
You know, and you're talking about blowing up the channel and starting over, and I was like, man, you know, and this is why we need each other, not just us here, but you guys here in the chat.
Yeah.
You know, Ice Queen, Mama Bear, Chris Caps. Yeah. Rod Saunders of Jew and Greek, my mom.
Colin's watching.
You know,
yeah.
Pastor Disaster says I need money to manage.
Colin McIntosh, is Colin McIntosh in there?
Yeah, Colin McIntosh.
Colin, I watched your Colin McIntosh has a cool channel, and he has a video on dissecting the Wizard of Oz, and it's
Did
awesome.
You watch it?
I watched both versions. The first version's good, but he has a second version where he goes almost scene by scene. I think he does go scene by scene. It's like a 45-minute video. I watched it after you left today, and dude, it was good. I liked it. Colin, that's a cool video, man. I think you got something really special going on there. That was neat.
I'm about to check that out because he was talking about
Colin McIntosh's YouTube channel.
Yeah, Colin, drop the link in the chat for people to watch.
Yeah, he was talking about that on one of the streams a couple weeks ago, wasn't he?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of spookiness in there.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Like he has an understanding of Masonic symbology. He has understanding of like the meanings of all the different names. He even refers to the Oompa Loompas, but the
Munchkins.
The Munchkins.
Yeah.
He calls, like what you were talking about earlier, he refers to the Munchkins as basically the citizens of heaven because they're childlike.
Yeah. No, that's interesting.
No, I said they're childlike because Christ said you will not enter heaven unless you become like these little children. And I said the Munchkins are them, the Christians that became like little children.
It's a cool video. I've never heard anybody talk about that.
Hey,
But there must have been
why?
some like serious
It is a great
work
shout
going on
out,
when
eh?
making that film.
Oh yeah.
Because I don't know if he claims all those things were intentional or if it was just kind of ordained to, have that end result. But didn't one of the Munchkin actors commit suicide on set during that movie? There's that lore of
they say yes, some say no, but you can clearly see what looks like someone hanging, swinging in the background, which is why having analog media is so important, because as Disney is doing, as a lot of these streaming websites are doing, they're scrubbing, they're changing, they're Mandela affecting us, and they're like, oh no, you
And they
didn't
don't even
see
need
that.
CERN to do it.
No, they don't. No, they just they put everything did.
Okay, guys, so they are. They gave me a big shout out, and I've gotten a few subs because of that. Probably about 20 subs. Now, zombies in the Bible. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? There it is.
Blind masses for what's to come. There's a In our current time in history, we must realize that the entertainment industry is not just.
That might be copyrighted, guys. I better not play that. I haven't watched this, so I don't know if these guys are legit or not.
Christ, I am asking that if you can, to please help to financially support this ministry. If you feel led to pledge any amount of money, it would be extremely helpful and greatly appreciated. There is a PayPal link in the description box and in my pinned comment below. You can also donate using Cash App. My cash tag is $Watchman1963. Thank you all so much for your prayers and support.
I will say this, and that's not a great way, a good name for your channel. $them Watchman.
God bless. The world, and even a big part of the church, is fast asleep to the reality of Jesus' return. Jesus gave the church a dire warning to be watchful for his return in Revelation 3:3. Remember, therefore, how you have received and heard. Hold fast and repent. Therefore, if you will not watch, I will come upon you as a thief, and you will not know what hour I will come upon you. I am not a prophet, nor does God speak to me audibly. That being said, God speaks to me every day through his holy word, the Bible. If people would just open their Bibles, God would have a word for them. The signs of Jesus' second coming are plastered all over the news. The 7-year tribulation is right around the corner, and the rapture of the church precedes the tribulation. So my question to Christ's followers is this: are you ready for what comes next?
The Bible says in Matthew chapter 24, verse 42, watch therefore, for you do not know the hour your Lord is coming. I want you to know, church, that Jesus Christ could come this month, or he might come next week, or he could even come.
Jesus.
Okay, I'm just going to go to the other one and check if it's copyrighted at the end. And if it is, I'll have to look. Nah, I don't want to delete that. Hang on, guys. Give me a sec. Oh, man. Hang on, guys.
Today's guest went on an unprecedented journey of faith, leaving everything behind to travel on foot across the United States while carrying an actual wooden cross and the gospel message of Jesus Christ to the lost.
Yeah, Bart, I'm not sure if they copyright, so I thought I'd better not play them because they love to copyright me and give me strikes. I've got to be really careful in what I play.
The broken, the downtrodden, and to the least of these. She's here today to tell us all about it right now. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Skywatch TV. I'm Jordan. This morning, if you missed last week's program, you're going to have to go back to the archives and take a look. What we were told about an expedition taken by today's guest will blow your mind, guaranteed. Before we get into this week, let me introduce who's in the house. She's the president and founder of Watchman Broadcasting and an absolute legend in Christian television. Please welcome Dorothy Spalding. Dorothy was here last week, and she's telling us about this journey that God instructed her to take years and years ago, where he tells her, I want you to find somebody to manufacture a wooden cross, but it's got to be a wooden cross, a literal wooden cross. We'll put a picture up on the screen here for those of you that are just joining us. But he gives her the instructions that he wants her to march from Florida to DC on foot carrying this cross. And you told us you knew that you were going to need some help carrying this cross. Now, an interesting player was introduced in last week's story, a man named Russell, and he decides to go with you on this expedition. We're talking about the people in her atmosphere that looked at her as totally insane.
Yeah.
And you just got to ask yourself, if somebody that you knew started saying, you know, God told me to go without money, I have no wherewithal, this is pre-cell phone, and I just want you to march on foot across the United States. Oh, but you're going to be carrying a cross the whole time, and there's no specific itinerary. You're not staying in Hotel 6 for free. Like there's no help from great big corporations. They're not funding you. You're not being sponsored. This is a straight up walk of faith, right?
Yeah.
I get it. I mean, I really get it. I think I might wonder if this were one of my kids, like maybe daddy should sit them down and find out what's on their mind about this, because it sounds dangerous. Let's make sure this is really God, right? But you got to go back and watch it, because you learn along the way the miracle after literal miracle, including, you know, Russell finding out that he's a diabetic and he starts to be woozy and he's being weakened. And a man emerges during this moment where he comes forth and he prays for Russell, and Russell's strength is restored and he continues carrying the cross. Every meal God takes care of along the way. Every place to stay, God carries you through this whole journey. And I'm not trying to frame this that it was easier, that you always had robust accommodations, but he gave you what you needed.
Yeah, we slept on the floor of a church or wherever.
Floor of a church. You told me last week at one point you almost stayed under a bridge, but then Russell said, you know, we're going to walk through this rainstorm. And it felt like Jesus was walking with you, and the weight of the cross just seemed like it lifted. So again, go back. It's not one you want to miss. I want to continue the story, though, Dorothy, because that was not the whole story at all. That was only the beginning. Let's just quickly set this up. Russell would become
my husband.
Okay.
Someone said before I left that I would meet my husband on this trip and we would get married. I said, oh, you're crazy. No way.
But it came to
but
pass.
Listen, this is why it's very important. When you minister the gospel, who you minister with, there's a soul tie.
Yeah.
That's why a lot of people would say, one day you're married in the spirit, one day you're going to be married in the natural. And I said, false prophet.
That journey from Florida to DC, though, it might have been your first, but that was not the only time you and Russell took up this cross, right?
We did it full time.
For those that don't know, if you're not familiar with the story, you can go back right now and look this up. It was all over it, national news. It became a real phenomenon. People were following this crazy couple, not a crazy couple, but in the view of the world, this crazy couple across the U.S. carrying a cross.
One lady said to me one time, she says, can't you get a real job? I said, you have no idea where I came from. And she wanted to hear more, so she took us to her restaurant. And by the time we got done, she had us ministering to all the guests.
Hello, airplane mode. Welcome to the channel.
At the restaurant and praying with people. Look at God.
Yeah, we done the Jesuits earlier on. I've been going 3 hours now, so we done the Jesuits earlier on. So just scroll back.
Over and over again. You saw many miracles, though, during your first trip from Florida to DC, but what were some of the miracles that happened during the 8 years of travel with Russell that would follow that?
Well, I mean, we did many other places, but then opening up the Christian television station was huge, because we got off the road after 8 years of walking. Only for 1 month, we already had drawn up the plans for where we were going to go the next one. And the Lord spoke to my heart. He said, now it's time for you to open up the TV station. When I was on ABC in Gainesville, Florida, I said, Lord, after I gave my heart to him, I said, Lord, I want a Christian television station so I can minister to thousands.
This was before the journey.
Before the journey. He said, go into all the world and preach the gospel. So I wanted to preach the gospel in all the world. Well, so Jimmy Thompson, he owns Stub Broadcasting. He said, I feel like you need to open the station in Augusta, Georgia. And with less than $100, we opened it and trusted God for everything. Now, if I hadn't done this walk, I don't know if I could have, but
Right.
for 8 years, I lived by this book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know that if he said it in this book, he'll do it.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is his love for me, I think.
So this dream of yours actually originated before the walk. You were because if you missed it, the beginning of last week, we talked about how you were already a successful businesswoman. You're working for ABC. She's in media. There was no reason in the world for her to, financially decide to take a monetarily zero compensation journey across the U.S. carrying a cross, other than the act of obedience. Correct?
Yeah. Well, I didn't have any money. I lost everything. Sin will take you further than you want to go.
Right.
But we walked for 8 years with no job, no credit card. Neither one of us had a credit card or a job or a bank account. We had to trust him every day for 8 years.
So tell me though, you don't just, save for God. You don't just start out one day. I think I'm going to launch a TV show.
Right.
I mean, especially back, contextually now, if somebody hears this, well, no, surely you would. You just buy a camera at Best Buy and launch your own internet platform. When you're talking about 80s, 90s, it did not work. It was much like music today. There was no such thing as an indie internet sensation, TikTok famous. This was back when if you didn't have Sony, MGM, Sparrow, Word, if there wasn't some kind of a master label that found you, discovered you, and then started building a platform with you, for the most part, you were limited to like small, very regional, very local.
Yeah.
You might rent a Grange hall or use the U.S. mail service to send flyers out. And maybe if you were lucky, you'd have 400 or 500 people show up and pack out a church, right? So contextually, you have to go back to when you're talking about. In context, this was late 80s, right?
We were married in 89. We kept walking till 95.
Okay, so mid 90s.
95.
Right.
Jimmy kept saying, you need to build this station. You need to build this station. But then when we said, finally, we turned him down for all those years. But when the Lord told us to do it, I took off a month to write the book. And then the Lord said, now I want you to open up the station.
Right.
So we told Jimmy we'd do it. But now he got Atlanta, so he had no money to open up this station. I said, don't worry, we'll do it by faith. And we did. I went around to all the different engineers and I introduced myself and they gave me all their old equipment. That's how we started.
And Jimmy was somebody that was still associated with a network where he's advocating.
Broadcasting.
So even there, God, he continues these ties that make it possible later, this in, if you're just obedient, he's opening the doors ahead of you.
Mm-hmm.
What has God done with your ministry, Dorothy, over the last several decades since all of this, trekking across the U.S., the launching of the television show, as I described at the onset, she's not describing herself. I'm telling you that Dorothy is a legend in Christian broadcasting. She's too humble to even believe that probably about herself. I'm telling you. But you just decades and decades now of Christian television ministry, being so faithful to that vision that God has given you. What have you seen God use your television program for? What has he been doing with you since?
One night I was there late night, like midnight, and I get a call. And they said, who's this Jesus they're talking about? And I said, you don't know who Jesus is? No, living in Augusta, Georgia. They did not know who Jesus was. And so I told the boy about Jesus and I introduced him to a life he never heard before because his father was a satanic priest and he was raised in Satanism. And he gave his heart to the Lord. And to me, television can change so many lives.
Yeah.
I see it every day. Mm-hmm. We had a young man had a gun to his head during a telethon. And so we stopped everything and we went and Angela Court was there. I said, sing to him. Because what did David do? What did Saul do when his messed up? Had the praises change him?
Yes.
So I said, sing to him. So she got on the phone and she said, can I sing you a song? And she sang, peace, peace, wonderful peace. Then the guy put the gun down. His story was his father committed suicide, his mother committed suicide, his brother committed suicide. And he was left and he was going to do it that night. But he heard the good news gospel.
Wow.
There's a halt that came to him because of the TV program. And by the way, the Satanist said, I said, why are you watching this? He says, I couldn't turn the dial. God does those things. You have people in
couldn't turn the dial.
Couldn't turn the dial. So then this boy gave his heart to the Lord for 2 weeks. He came into the station continually just praising God for changing his life. 2 weeks later, he was hit by a drunk driver and killed.
Wow.
So for 2 weeks, because of Christian television,
Wow.
he changed his life. Christian television changed Russell's life and my life. And so it's very important to us. And when he says, go into all the world and preach, that is very important. You don't know who's going to turn that dial. How many movie stars have gotten saved on their deathbed?
Yeah.
Because they couldn't turn the dial.
Yeah.
So it's so important to me. My heart is bring as many lost in as we can. That's it. And there's times it gets hard when your lightning hits your tower and you just got it put up there, new antenna, and there's no money to fix it. And there's stuff like that happened all the time. But God,
Yes.
we would just say, but God, you never failed us before. That's why you should keep a journal, what he does. So you can hold it up to the devil and say, take a look at this.
Yeah.
Take a look at this.
I love
My
that.
God.
I love that.
Will come through. And he always does.
That's really what this book is. I mean, it's an account of just almost innumerable. We'll never get to them during these programs, but I mean, you brought me this list, Dorothy. I already had like 4 pages of additional talking points and bits and parts from the book. And then she brings me another list. And by the way, if you want to get to some of these, and I mean, it is just a litany of bullet points that take us back through parts and bits of this journey that you've been on. One day at a time video, rainstorm, animals stand at attention. What is animals stand at attention?
Oh, that's amazing.
This
Whenever
might resonate with you.
I got it.
Hey, are you listening?
The horses and the cows. But we were walking down this road, farmland, and I could see the trees. It was like they were clapping their hands. You could hear it. It's like they're clapping their hands. But I noticed the animals all stood at attention when the cross went by. I said, Russell, did you notice that? How don't they know? But they all stood at attention when the cross walked by and they watched us go. It was amazing.
Wow, that's incredible.
That is very
I find it
beautiful.
interesting too how many people you're talking about. I mean, I know that even me, I just take for granted that being that we're in America and there's a church on like every corner in every city, it's hard to imagine somebody in this country that doesn't know who Jesus is. And yet you're telling stories of people that are going, what's this cross? Who is this Jesus guy? And that's just hard for me to fathom when we live in a society that's so saturated with at least the appearance of different churches. Whether or not those churches are effective or not is a different show, but they're everywhere. How does a person live in this society and never hear of Jesus? But you ran across many of them. That's just wild to me.
They don't have a Sunday school. They should get out of those churches and meet the people in their community. They need to have a Saturday Sunday school. But they don't. We're too busy building our kingdom. Well, your kingdom isn't going to mean a hill of beans if it's not done with the right attitude.
Wow.
And it starts with meeting those people right outside your doors.
Absolutely.
We were in Louisiana, same kind of thing happened. I mean, this is probably 30, 40 kids came up to us. What is he carrying?
What?
Across Louisiana. Monroe, Louisiana. Had no idea what he was carrying.
That's wild. You were already meeting those people where they were. You were working with the street people and doing all of that ministry.
Vast thinker. I've heard some people say that the post-trib, that God wouldn't put his bride, wouldn't beat his bride, and then at the end come and rescue the bride. They're pre-tribbers, but their argument for post-trib is because Christ wouldn't beat his bride before the wedding. But tell that to the apostles, every single one of them got martyred. So that's a poor argument, I think, anyway.
Before you even ever decided to carry the
What did
you were already doing it.
What did he tell to these kids that wanted to know what this strange apparatus was?
Told them how to receive Jesus, told them about the cross, told them that Jesus came to die for their sins on that cross. And they would give their heart to the Lord. They're so open, but we're not busy doing the kingdom business. We're too busy building our own kingdoms.
Yeah, wow.
So it wasn't just adults and mixed teens. You guys met a lot of kids, though. Those weren't the only kids you met. I understand there were kids in Santa Fe. One of them even got saved.
Yeah, what happened in Santa Fe was amazing because the kids there are so into New Age that that's all they know. And so we had all this bunch of kids got out of school. We're down there in the park with the cross. And they came up and they started laughing and jeering at us with that cross. And Russell just stood there and said, okay, I'll be still. I want to talk to you about a story. And he told the story about Jesus. And he said, who do you think God is? Oh, the grass is God, the trees are God, this is God. Well, can that God do anything for you? No. So he gave the gospel message. One boy came as the others were trying to pull him away. He said, if you want to believe what I said, come touch this cross. Put your hand on this cross. And they were trying to pull him away and laughing at him and tell him you're crazy. And Russell went up. That boy came up with tears in his eyes.
No
He said, I want to
way.
know Jesus. And gave his heart to Jesus with all
Wow.
his friends being laughing at him and mocking him. To me, that was so huge.
Yeah.
For that boy to have such courage. We didn't touch the others. They didn't want to receive, but that one boy.
But the seed was still planted, and you never know
Yeah.
what may have come out of that.
You just save one person and your whole life in service of the Lord is worth it.
That's exactly what I was thinking. That little boy, we don't know the story that he's going to tell in
Yes.
eternity. But I bet you're going to see him there, and he's got his own story of his own cross.
Yeah.
And he learned it through you guys, through what you did, your sacrifices along the way.
Absolutely.
It's worth it.
This book, We Walk by Faith, is just filled with nuggets like that. The story after story of what Dorothy and Russell witnessed God do for them and through them during this total act of faith, walking across the United States, carrying this cross in total obedience, with much of the world looking at them as total nut jobs, except for those impacted by their efforts.
Yeah.
Those souls that will never be the same. And the totality of what that looks like. Again, we will never know the number of people reached. I want to make sure that you know how you can get your copy of this incredible work. Right now at the skywatchtvstore.com, you're going to find the Walk by Faith special offer. Now, this offer includes 3 masterpiece works. First, you're going to receive, of course, Dorothy Spalding's new book, We Walk by Faith, Not by Sight, where you'll journey with Dorothy across the United States in an epic act of faith. You'll also discover how to hear the voice of God and carry it through, never wavering or quitting when times get tough. You're going to discover how to identify the secrets of prevailing prayer, tenacity, and courage, which I think Dorothy embodies, and you can tell that as she's here sharing her story, and learn to be a bold and fearless witness of Jesus Christ. But that's not all. You're also going to receive Dr. Thomas Horn's true biographical book, The Boy from El Mirage, where you'll learn how Tom cheated death 3 times and came to discover why God spared him for a kingdom purpose. This biography covers everything from how he met his lifelong mate, Nita, his early years as a pastor, supernatural events that he's experienced in his long and storied life, and most importantly, how his story relates a call to action and message of truth for everybody today. And finally, you'll receive the biographical book, No Fences, by Whispering Ponies Ranch founder Nita Horn, where you'll experience her journey from devastation to tenderness, humor and warmth, from surviving poverty and discovering an invisible God who has a plan for all of our lives. No Fences is an intimate and revealing narrative of losing dreams, getting them back, and the faith journey in between. Altogether, these 3 masterpieces hold a retail value of $60, yours now for your donation of only $35 plus shipping and handling. Ladies and gentlemen, you don't want to miss out on this incredible opportunity to get this book, We Walk by Faith, Not by Sight. I promise you will be inspired and you'll learn a ton. So please make sure you get your copy of these 3 works. We Walk by Faith, Not by Sight, Dorothy Spalding. Dorothy, there's a couple of things I want to make sure that we cover in this program today, and that is you've also contributed to another Defender book, Encounters. And now the story that you share in that book goes back to actually before this expedition that we've been talking about. You want to share that today?
Yeah. Actually, the one was when I went out to Pensacola to minister to somebody. Of course, I had to take a bus because I had no money. And somebody sent me money to come out and minister to this person. This was late night. I was going to go home on the bus. And when I got in, I sat right in the very front seat. And this driver looked over and he says, "You better keep me awake tonight because I'm really tired." They called me in. And I was reading my Bible and I fell asleep. And I saw me in a wheelchair because of an accident. So I said, no, this will be no accident tonight. Nothing's going to hurt anybody in this bus tonight. Well, back to sleep. All of a sudden, the bus is going this way. It's down in the medium, right, driving in the medium, hitting trees. And I woke up and I said, no, in the name of Jesus. And I started yelling out, Jesus. That bus was picked up, put on the other side of the road, and nothing happened to any of us. And when the driver went out, he couldn't even find the first scratch.
Wow.
And he said, wow, am I glad you were here? I said, it wasn't me, it was Jesus.
Yeah.
It's Jesus. The other angel story that we wrote for in your book, I had just painted my painting and I was taking it to New Orleans.
Right.
And on the way back, there's a bridge that's like 30 miles long. And the girl whose car I was using, she said, now if that light comes on, you get gas ASAP because you'll be out of gas. So I'm on this bridge and all of a sudden that light goes off. And I know it's 30 miles long. And I said, Lord, you have got to carry me like you always have on this bridge. I cannot do this without you. So I said, do I get off here? He said, no. I went 3 exits. He said, don't get off on the 3rd exit. He told me to get off, and I saw a bunch of trucks down there. So I went off, and I drove down by the trucks. Well, I walked across the highway, and I yelled, does anybody have any gas? Well, this big guy comes up, and he says, yeah, I do. He takes his knife out of his pocket, and he whacks up, so they could make a funnel, so he could make a funnel out of a piece of cardboard, and he brought it over. Now, I had taken $5 and tucked it, and I was going to give him, because in those days, gas wasn't that much, so I was going to give him the $5 bill. At the end, I was witnessing Jesus the whole time he was there. We'd gone back across the median to come to where my car was, and he pushed me, and I thought, why did he push me? He said, there's a snake there. And so I thought, well, that's a good guy. That was nice. But I'm witnessing Jesus, just witnessing Jesus. You see, you get out of all kinds of trouble when you use the name Jesus. I don't care what it is. Use the name Jesus. I can tell you hundreds of stories where people were in danger. They used the name of Jesus. They got out. I get in the car. Next thing I know, this hand's going up my dress. And I yell, I'm a preacher. You can't do that to me. In Jesus' name, you get out of here. And he says, well, lady, I'm going to have you. And I said, no, you're not, in Jesus' name. I kept using Jesus' name. And all of a sudden, he was picked up and stood frozen on the side of the road. And I heard the Holy Spirit say, get out of here now. So I went down, I turned around and got out, and he was still standing there frozen. Well, the $5 that I had given him was, when I came out to the car the next morning, it was laying there on my seat.
Oh my
The
goodness.
angels had taken that $5, showing me they were there all the time. So, have no fear about things like that because Jesus is there.
You don't hear stories like that very much anymore.
No, you don't.
You're not from people that you believe. Why do you think we don't see more of that activity day to day? What's wrong, Dorothy?
You're counting on your almighty dollar. You're counting on your own self to be able to take care of these things. But when you die to yourself, then God says, I can use you now.
Yes. What I love is that while we've been filming these 2 weeks with Dorothy Joe, you've been, and for very good reason, accurately saying that these people at the time were looking at you like you guys were just nuts. What's going through my mind every time I hear him say that is that the Bible says that and in proper context, the Bible says that the Lord will use what the world perceives as foolish to completely confound the wise. And you're just doing this over and over and over again, confounding the wise, confounding the wise. Your story is so convicting because it literally proves from every single angle you can walk by faith. You can do what the Lord tells you to do.
Yeah.
You know that voice.
We could never have raised up this station. We had no money, less than $100. But God did it. You know Marcus Lamb. I love Marcus Lamb before he passed. Marcus used to call me every month for 6 months. Are you ready to quit yet? Are you ready to give up? What? Quit and give up? And so he wanted us to come to be on Daystar, and we went down there one day, and he told us to take him home. So we took him home, and before he got out of the car, he said, I'll give you this, this, and this. Just come work for me. I said, Marcus, I love you, but if I ever worked for you, we would never get along. Because when you're out of the call of God,
Okay.
Yes.
Too many people leave the call that God gave them to do because it looks good.
Yeah.
It looks wonderful.
Yeah.
But you miss God.
Yeah.
You have got to hear him, stay faithful. I want to read this just real quick.
Please, go ahead.
Lord Jesus, I trust you to do the impossible in my life. I am your servant, and I gladly receive the promises you give me. And I trust you to do whatever you say. And that's important.
Okay, Bas, I'll tell you a story. In the 1990s, I was in Junee jail. And one night, about 3 in the morning, I'm laying in my cell asleep, and I sort of woke up because I felt a presence walk into the cell. Now, the cell door was locked, but I just felt a presence walk in. So I opened my eyes. I'm facing the wall. I open my eyes, and I can see a silhouette. I went to roll over, and the more I tried to roll over, the more my energy was used against me. I couldn't roll over. And I started freaking, and I chanted the Lord's Prayer. Now, I wasn't even Christian then, but that's exactly how I went. I chanted the Lord's Prayer. I saw the silhouette leave the wall and look back out the cell door. And when it done that, that force field on me loosened, and I nearly rolled over, but it came back again, and the force field was on me. And I kept chanting the Lord's Prayer, and it went. And I don't know if I was getting abducted or whatever happened, but there's 100% I saw a silhouette, I felt a presence, and it freaked out when I started chanting the Lord's Prayer.
We do that.
Yeah.
Whatever he says, not what the best thing comes along. How many preachers quit because they got a better deal over here,
Yeah.
and then they don't last?
Talking about how she came from starting the station with less than $100, and they've recently acquired a new station.
Yeah, we were given
Yeah.
30. I prayed for the Gainesville station. 36 years later, it was given to us.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you had no idea that you were praying for this thing that would eventually be gifted to you. That's amazing. Dorothy, with just like a minute on the clock, for people that want to learn more about you and your ministry, where would...
Okay, one more, guys, and I'm out.
latest research and 3-book anthology on the unspoken mysteries of Jesus Christ is the most important.
Come on, go.
Dr. Thomas Horn says that his latest research and 3-book anthology on the unspoken mysteries of Jesus Christ is the most important body of legacy work that he's ever written. Ladies and gentlemen, today we begin a special investigative series on the life of Jesus Christ from Genesis to Revelation that details profound mysteries never before presented about Christ in 3 brand new volumes and organized in a way that is guaranteed to fascinate and boggle the minds of everyone from seasoned scholars to new believers. This is the life of Christ illuminated like you've never experienced before. This new 3-book anthology by Dr. Thomas Horn is being described by those closest to him as his magnum opus and the culmination of his entire life's work. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Skywatch TV. Welcome to Skywatch TV, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Joe Artis Horn, and today is a historic day. The people on panel and in the studio audience know what I'm talking about. We begin a special investigative series by Dr. Thomas Horn, Donna Howell, and Allie Anderson on the life of Jesus Christ in a way that you, I guarantee, have never experienced from Genesis to Revelation. It is an exhaustive piece, and so large that it had to take place over 3 volumes. And those closest to my father, Dr. Thomas Horn, are describing this work as his magnum opus. This, in my view, as his son, is probably the most important bit of legacy work that he'll have ever amassed in his life. And he feels, and we're going to talk to him in just a second, like these 3 books, the mystery of...
Okay, you're very correct, Bas. I was also in Goulburn Jail. Goulburn Jail is one of the hardest jails in Australia, actually. I'm in Goulburn Jail, and I wasn't saved then. I wasn't Christian, but guys would wake up and go to muster. Muster is when you'd all go on parade and they'd count you. Well, in the morning, some of the guys that would be saying, gee, I had a bad dream last night. I was paralyzed and I couldn't move. That's a succubus. And this happened to a lot of guys, and it was really freaky. And people were dreaming that they were paralyzed from the neck down. And I had a couple of dreams of it as well. So it was really freaky. You're right. Prisons are, yeah.
Jesus. And it's difficult to hold all these at the same time and volley them on the screen so that you can see them. These 3 beautiful volumes are what Tom himself is describing as the most important thing Defender Publishing has ever released. And I could not agree more. The next few weeks for you, the viewer, is going to be a real treasure and an adventure that you're not going to want to miss out on. Tom, I want to launch right in today. We have very limited time. What made you write The Mystery of Jesus, Genesis through Revelation, in a 3-volume anthology?
Well, we never knew in the beginning, of course, that it would be that large, but how should we not have guessed that it would be? Because when we got into it, some of the material in here that was uncovered by Donna and Allie and their intensive research, I pastored 25 years and didn't know these things to be true. I mean, it is mind-blowing, it is explosive, but this all goes back, Joe, to 2012. I was there at the end of the Mayan calendar, the world's going to end, and I was doing shows everywhere in which I was saying, no, that's not what the Mayans said. I'd done the research at the scholarly level and read the prophecies of the shaman and all the rest of it. They didn't say that. What they said was more interesting. They said that 2012 represented the end of an era and the dawn of a final world epoch. And so for me, that was a lot more engaging. I'm making the point that everybody's afraid, everybody's fearful,
That's right,
the world is going to end, blah, blah, blah. And I said, if you ask me, though, why am I not afraid of what's coming? We'll show the clip in a moment that details what I said that day. But basically, I showed how Jesus is the center of Genesis all the way through the end, the book of Revelation, and that I have confidence in this eternal glorified man, that what he did in his first advent, he's going to continue to fulfill prophecy.
Yeah.
The clip went viral, and we were getting more contact from people all around the world. Please tell us more, tell us more. So for the last 10 years, this has been the pipeline, what finally has become known as this 3-volume set.
Well, without further ado, let's show the viewers at home this clip, because if you haven't seen it, you don't want to miss it. Watch this.
And at the same time, however, that these people are becoming so liberal, they also now no longer even believe in the divinity of Christ. They doubt that he was anything more than a historical figure who happened to just be in the right place at the right time, and a cult following grew up around him. But I want to tell you something. That's not the kind of faith that's going to get you through if this kind of stuff really starts happening. The rapture could happen, the Lord could take us all away, but we could see some stuff coming down on this earth. And I want to have great faith, don't you? And I want to tell you something. They're wrong about Jesus, because from the book of Genesis all the way through the book of Revelation, it gives us the concept. I'm going to give it to you very quickly, and then I'm going to quit. In Genesis, he is the prophesied one who will be the fulfillment of the proto-evangelium, the divine seed of the woman who will crush the serpent's head and redeem mankind to God. That's where the revelation begins. Oh, you know he's our champion, don't you? Partly why I can have such great confidence, because I don't intend on slugging it out with the giants all by my little pretty self. In Exodus, he's the Passover lamb. In Leviticus, he's the high priest making intercession for men in the Holy of Holies. In Numbers, he is the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night that guides the covenant people. In Deuteronomy, he is a prophet like unto Moses that will arrive in the fullness of time. In Joshua, Judges, and Ruth, he is the captain of our salvation, the judge and the lawgiver and the blessed kinsman redeemer. In 1st and 2nd Samuel, he is the coming Messiah, exalted by God with power. In 1st and 2nd Kings, he is the king who will reign with ultimate power. In 1st and 2nd Chronicles, he is from the tribe of Judah, typified by the temple with wisdom greater than that of Solomon. In Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes, he is the dayspring from on high and the Lord our shepherd, whose kingdom shall be from everlasting to everlasting. In the Song of Solomon, he is the bridegroom whose marriage to the bride is faithful to his coming. In Isaiah, he is God with us. The sevenfold Spirit of God is upon him. He heals the blind, makes the lame walk, unplugs the ears of the deaf. He becomes a light to the Gentiles, who dies as a guilt offering for sin, but who rises from the dead to live forever. In Jeremiah and Lamentations, he becomes the righteous branch. In Ezekiel and Daniel, he is the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven. In Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. He is the pierced Son and the burden bearer, a mighty Savior and a cleansing fountain, who becomes a priest and a king. And then, ladies and gentlemen, the New Testament arrives, and here he is, a babe wrapped in swaddling clothes, lying in a manger, the fulfillment of the prophecies of Isaiah, born of a virgin. In Mark, he's a miracle worker. In Luke, he's the perfect physician. In John, he is the only begotten Son of God, the Lamb of God, the bread of life, the light of the world, and the door to the sheepfold. In Acts, he is the ascended Lord and the judge of the living and the dead. In Romans, he is the root of Jesse that becomes a rock cut out without hands, that becomes an offense to many, but that becomes a deliverer to others. In 1st and 2nd Corinthians, he is the first fruits of the church. In Galatians, he sets us free. In Ephesians, he is the head over all things and the cornerstone of the church. In Philippians, Colossians, Thessalonians, and Timothy, he is the image of the invisible God who meets our every need, the mediator between God and man, and the soon-coming King. In Titus and Philemon, he is the blessed hope and a friend who is closer than the brother. Somebody say amen. In Hebrews and James, he is the author and the finisher of our faith, the key to patience and wisdom, and the blood that washes away our sins. In 1st and 2nd Peter, he is a living stone and a chief shepherd who watches over the church. In 1st and 2nd John and 3rd John, he is everlasting love and eternal life for those that know him. While in Jude, he is the only wise God and our one and only Savior. And now let hell hear this, because in Revelation, he arrives, the Alpha and Omega, the first and the last, the manifested word of Almighty God, the bright and morning star, the Lion of the tribe of Judah that hath prevailed, the King of kings and Lord of lords, who, ladies and gentlemen, whose appearance is going to shatter the schemes of occultic spirits and evil men with the brightness of 1,000 suns, and at whose coming every knee is going to bow and every tongue is going to confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. How can I have confidence for the future? How can I not have confidence for the future? The bottom line, the occult have a plan. God has a better one. I hope you know whose side you are on. And there's the last and final part. Thank you for putting up with me.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah.
That was 10 years ago, almost to the date, give or take a month. What a prophetic, what a timely message.
Yeah.
And, you know, I was there live to experience that. And I remember at the same time, Tom, what a lot of people don't know is that some people had actually infiltrated the conference where this was happening while he was giving that, while he was in that moment, that 5-minute run that you just watched. These people had come into our conference and they were passing out all of this antichrist propaganda. And people thought they were with the conference, so they're just take one, pass it down, take one, pass it down. What you can't hear in the audience is that while he's giving praise to the glory of God, and the audience of people are cheering him on and being inspired, these people that Bob Ulrich describes as demon-possessed, he said, I looked into the eyes of their leader, and I swear to you, they looked reptilian. Now, make of it what you will. The point is, these people were there to do damage to the conference, to spread chaos and confusion, and L.A. Marzulli said that he saw one of the females in the back, casting spells. So is that not the power of Christ's triumphantness on display?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely on display. And Joe, this is the thing, one of the reasons, only one of many, that I say this is the most important thing we've ever published. It's the spirit that caused those people not to prevail that day. And that is this. The New Testament says that it is the testimony of Jesus Christ that is the spirit of prophecy.
Right.
Yeah.
Donna, we have to move gears so quickly today. You looked at some amazing mathematical statistics while doing the research for these books that supports Christ's messianic claims of the prophetic fulfillment. Can you share some of that with us?
Yeah, actually, so when it comes to Jesus appearing in the 66 books of the Bible, I believe that that is the place to start. And here's why. If Jesus wasn't who he said he was, then the rest of the 66 books and the Gospels is not relevant to the topic of how it points to him in the first place. Also, God cannot be boxed into human hubris and mathematics and science, and he's not going to prove himself in the same way that when the Pharisees asked Jesus to perform a miracle and do parlor tricks, he said no, because he knew that the motives was wrong. God is not going to be boxed in. He can't be proven by our math and our science, but he does allow himself to be seen in some phenomenal ways in human mathematics and science. And so I start there because I want to reach out to the people, not to those people who are going to reject anything they hear and they're not going to listen and they've already decided before I've even opened my mouth that they're going to reject anything. Right. I want to speak to the one who's sitting on the fence and says, if Jesus really is the guy in these 66 books, how can I be sure? I'm looking at math, I'm looking at science, and I just don't see God in that. I want to speak to them for just a moment, because Lee Strobel and Peter Stoner, okay, Lee Strobel, Case for Christ. Peter Stoner is a renowned mathematician, and they put some facts and figures together, and what they discovered as far as the mathematical probability that Jesus accidentally or coincidentally fulfilled some of the prophecies when he was born into the earth and when he did what he did. I mean, these are some astounding mathematics that point to the idea that rejecting that Jesus was who he said he was is just humanity's hubris. So first of all, I'm going to talk really briefly about basic calculable axioms. I just lost half the crowd here. That means what we know to be true. So for a moment, let's divorce our minds from thinking of Jesus and the resurrection or the ascension or the miracles that he performed, and just simply look at how did the man, the historical man named Jesus Christ, how did he fulfill what was prophetically said of him in his birth, lineage, things like that. To begin, we begin with a number of approximately 400,000 Palestinian Jews alive at the time of Christ. That means that any one of 400,000 Jews might have accidentally been the Messiah during that time, right? Okay, so then we got to take the first basic calculable axiom, the thing that we know to be true, that is that over half the Jews in the Palestine area at the time of Christ were an owned slave. We know that Jesus was not an owned slave. He was a servant because he chose to be a servant to his fellow man. That's not the same as a slave. So that number 400,000 automatically gets cut down to approximately 150,000. From there, we look at how many of them were born in the town of Bethlehem. Now, listen, Bethlehem was nowheresville at the time of Christ. It was. Now, it was a city of David. David was born there, so it was considered somewhat a holy city or a sacred city at the very least. But if a woman wanted to, if she found out she was pregnant of a Jewish heritage and she was going to say, I might be carrying the Messiah, I've got to give birth to some, in some holy town, they would have picked Jerusalem. That was the holy city. Bethlehem is not where they would have necessarily gone, because some prophets spoke of it, but the majority of the Jews were like, holy city, holy city. You know what I'm saying? If we take the number.
Okay, why was God born in Bethlehem? Bethlehem was where they raised the sacrificial sheep for the temple. That's why there were three, three shepherds at Christ's birth, because that's where they raised the sacrificial sheep for the temple in Bethlehem.
150,000, which was the basic calculable axioms that we got down to. And then we truncate that down to what would have been born in nowheresville.com, the town of Bethlehem at the time. What we end up with is mere hundreds, okay? 200-300 probably max. Now we look at lineage. Of those Jews who were not a slave and born in the town of Bethlehem at the same time of Jesus Christ, how many of them were from the line of David? This takes it all the way down to probably in the tens. With that in mind, let's go to a couple of the things that were said about his death. Cura fragrum, that is the Roman word that meant when the legs would be broken of somebody who is perishing on the cross. It was to accelerate their death. They had many reasons for this. Tomorrow was a holy day, or they need to get back to the Sabbath, whatever the thing. So not only did this not happen with Christ, it was specifically requested by the Jewish religious leaders in John 19:31. They specifically requested that happened to Jesus. And yet it's prophesied in Psalms 34:20, Exodus 12:46, and Numbers 9:12 that the Messiah's bones would never be broken. It's unusual that they wouldn't have been. It was requested. So take those basic calculable axioms, and what you have now is a mathematical improbability that Jesus could have accidentally or coincidentally fulfilled anything. Getting back to Lee Strobel and Peter Stoner, I'll say this very quickly. A mathematician in this case, okay, would have to, one, narrow down the number of possible candidates down from the basic calculable axioms we've just discussed. Two, calculate the probability statistics of a man who died in this exact manner when it was not the norm. Three, add the prophecy to the equation involving other potential prophetic fulfillments that we did not discuss, such as him dying on a cursed pole to begin with, because Jesus could have died a number of different ways. The fact that he was pierced in hands, feet, side, those things, plus other specific prophetic details from Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, Hosea, Zechariah, and other specific prophetic details of the Old Testament. And finally, four, they would have to calculate the possibility that all of this occurred by some freak fluke accident to a man who also just happened to claim to be the Messiah in that century, in that time, right? So the coincidence of Christ accidentally or coincidentally fulfilling only eight of the Old Testament prophecies, Lee Strobel says, listen to this quote, guys, one chance in 100 million billion, and that number is millions of times greater than the total number of people who have ever walked the planet since the beginning of time, okay? Peter Stoner adds to that. Also, he computes the probability of fulfilling only 48 prophecies. And he says it is, listen to this number, one chance in a trillion.
Okay, so there's no chance.
Trillion.
Oh,
That's
she's still
all
saying
that,
trillion.
all the trillions. The point is, at this point, it takes more faith not to believe that Jesus was exactly who he said he was.
Wow. All of the trillions. Have you guys ever heard this before? I want to show you at home how you can get a copy of all three of these volumes put together in a beautiful anthology. Watch this. We'll be right back.
Ladies and gentlemen, Donna Howell, Dr. Thomas Horn, and Allie Anderson team up to bring you their magnum opus. Introducing the brand new 3-volume anthology from Defender Publishing, The Mystery of Jesus from Genesis to Revelation. This new collection is being described by those closest to Dr. Thomas Horn as the most important body of legacy work he's ever written. And it's being offered right now in Skywatch TV's largest giveaway of the year. Skywatch TV is proud to announce the Mystery of Jesus Grand Giveaway. Volume 1 of The Mystery of Jesus from Genesis to Revelation begins in the Old Testament and reveals multiple ways that Jesus made personal appearances on earth called Christophanies prior to his birth through the Virgin Mary. The many links between Mount Sinai, the day of Pentecost, and the Ascension from astounding but largely hidden revelations in the original Hebrew and Greek. How the words of the prophets regarding the someday Messiah preceded a 400-year season of silence and anticipation that led to disastrously incorrect interpretations of who he would be when he arrived, and so much more. Volume 2 begins in the New Testament and demonstrates what social and political events transpired during the intertestamental period that led to a movement of numerous false messiahs whose military pursuits splintered the Jews into various disjointed sects, each with their own misguided, documented messianic expectations. How extra-biblical and apocryphal books written around the time of Jesus give fresh insight on New Testament characters, their true identity and reputation, and how that affects proper biblical interpretation, the real and largely misunderstood purpose of Christ's ministry years on earth, and why there is an apparent deficit of miraculous manifestations in our day, and we're barely scratching the surface. Then Volume 3 moves directly to the Apocalypse, where you'll learn clear-cut, comprehensible explanations behind even the most enigmatic and hard-to-understand symbols in Revelation that anyone can read and understand. How Jesus, present and active in all 66 books of the Bible, makes his grand and final entrance in shining glory to welcome into the New Jerusalem all who receive the free gift of salvation. And we're just getting started. Presented in 3 brand new volumes, The Mystery of Jesus from Genesis to Revelation is organized in a way that is guaranteed to fascinate and boggle the minds of everyone, from seasoned scholars to new believers. This is the life of Christ illuminated like you've never experienced before. When you order this incredible collection, you'll also receive the new Best of Defender Publishing ebook collection on data disc. Now, for the first time, this must-have assortment features 120 of the most information-packed best-selling books in Defender history, including the never-before digitally released version of the Defender family. $1,000 all by itself, but that's not all. With now at skywatchtvstore.com. Order now or call 1-844-750-4985.
Welcome back to Skywatch TV. I'm Joe Horn. I think we're having too much fun today as we visit this new 3-book anthology by Dr. Thomas Horn, Ali Anderson, and Donna Howell, The Mystery of Jesus. Along with the offer that you just saw on television, you're also going to receive the largest giveaway of the year. Because of the sake of time, I want to ask you something. Before we went to the break, you mentioned the trillions and trillions and trillions, basically making the case to those pessimists that it is almost impossible for Christ not to be exactly who he said he was. And Tom said something interesting as well.
Well, it's because, she's saying this is only him fulfilling 48 of the prophecies that were trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions, just insane levels of numbers. And yet scholars say that there are as few as 2,000 prophecies that he probably fulfilled, as many as 2,500 from the Old Testament until the present day. But then, of course, the ones he's going to fulfill. Because if you look backward and you say he fulfilled literally thousands, which then, Donna, we can't comprehend.
Right, it's incalculable math.
Yeah, what that mathematical equation would be. But if that was true, and it was, and it is, and it's provable, and anybody that's got an open mind and wants to read scripture can read for themselves, right? If that's true, then we have great confidence that the next prophecies in the book of Revelation, which is the 3rd volume of this series, that those are going to happen too. Right. And of course, in that clip that you showed at the beginning of this program, you could see how people responded. Absolutely.
And that's why this is the place to start, because you have 66 books of the Bible all pointing to this one man who is so proven in the scriptures at this point that it's almost humanity's hubris to even deny.
Yeah, it starts at the very beginning, the prophecy that God speaks to the serpent and he says, because you have done this, you've lied to the woman, you've misled them, you're going to crawl on your belly. I will put enmity between thee and the woman, between thy seed, which is the Hebrew zerah, which literally means offspring. It means children. And when you read that, this incredible tenet emerges that Satan has seed and that it is at enmity with Christ. This is mind-boggling kinds of stuff. Everything has to do with seed. From Genesis 3:15 and forward, it is all about preserving the seed line, the genealogies that would arrive ultimately there in Bethlehem, the little town you was talking about, and the birth of Jesus Christ. Oh, thou Bethlehem, though thou be least among everything is about the seed. And this is the reason why God ordered the Hebrews not to intermarry with the heathen populations. It was to preserve the seed line down to Christ. But some scholars believe that that was the primary reason that the Watchers descended in the days of Jared and began intermingling with the human species and corrupting the bloodlines, is because this was an all-out effort to cut off the birth line that eventually would make it to the Messiah. And yet you can see all through history how God protects this particular seed. Now, one other final thing I would bring up very quickly, does a verse in the book of Daniel connect to this seed versus seed narrative? Because speaking of the last days of human government, Daniel said something very intriguing. He said, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. So when you read that verse, Daniel doesn't go on to explain who they are, but the personal pronoun they, and that they are mingling with the seed of men, raises this question about what in the world is going on in the last days that he's making a reference to here. Josh, it sounds very much like the last days will see a repeat of what happened in Genesis 6, where this illegal seed came down, mingled with humanity, and gave birth to the Nephilim, and that this will be happening again in the last days.
I got to jump in super quick and say there was some things going on in the garden that we don't really think about. The church hears Genesis or Genesis 3:15 or Proto-Evangelion or however you say it. They hear those words and they automatically think Adam, Eve, and the fall. But what they don't understand is that these were the very first humans that ever walked the planet. The deception that would have occurred to their human psychology in their opening mind, as Barnes Notes says. In fact, let me read you an excerpt from Barnes Notes really quick. He says, let us remember that this was the very first falsehood that these people had ever heard. He said the woman that these people had ever heard. Her mind was also infantile as yet so far as experience was concerned. The opening mind, meaning the brand new mind, is naturally inclined to believe the truth of every assertion until it is learned by experience the falsehood of some assertions. In other words, you can't recognize a lie unless you've heard one, right?
Right.
He goes on to say, there was also in this falsehood what gives the power to deceive, which is a great deal of truth combined with the element of untruth. The tree was not immediately physically fatal to life. That's something that the serpent said. And the eating of it really did issue in a knowledge of good and evil. So along with the deception came a great deal of truth. That's what gives deception the power to deceive.
Right.
So human psychology in its infancy, we're going to pick it up right here next week. But we don't see what really happened with the first people in the garden.
This 3-book anthology aims specifically to really unpack this. And here's the thing, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to spend an extra couple of weeks on this series because even the number of weeks we normally allot for a series, it's just not enough.
Okay, guys, I'm out.
Are you guys excited that
God
we are
bless.